also medicines to prevent.
Mga katansa, magandang gabi po sa inyo lahat. Live po ngayon itong senatorial debate ng mga senador dito sa SMNI. So mapapanood natin siya live ngayon. Mamaya magbibigay ako ng latest update ito. Magbibigay ako ng komento sa inyo.
Mga bakuna na ito ay ibebenta natin sa ibang bansa. Number 2 po is education. Bilang profesor po ng batas at ng medisina po, at aking napansin po na itong mga kabataan po natin, mga estudyante pagdating po sa universidad, mag-aaral po ng medisina at batas, meron po silang kahinaan. It will become mandatory for all parents to bring their children.
Pahingan lang natin, medyo na-late ako dito eh. Breaking news to.
Sa eskwelahan, libre po ang ibibigay na almusal as an incentive. Number 3 po is
Attorney Olarte, you're out of time, unfortunately. Thank you. Attorney Salvador Panelo.
Ako po ay
Diyan pala si Sal Panelo.
upang ituloy ang mga reforma na sinimulan ni Presidente Rodrigo Duterte, isang serbisyong malasakit at matap. Ang pangarap ko ay pangarap ninyo. Gusto ko po na palagi niyong iisipin at abutin.
Mega love shoutout po kay sa inyo, ma'am.
At sa inyong
Ma'am Jean Sumera.
Ayon
Yan.
po sa ating saligang batas, ang pangunahing tungkulin ng gobyerno ay magsilbi at magbigay ng proteksyon. Isusulong ko po sa ngayon dito
Hi, good evening po sa lahat of friends.
ang palawigin pa at palawakin pa ang libreng edukasyon, ang health at legal services. Bigyan ng 10,000 allowance ang mga ina ng tahanan. Doble
Bahala na kayo kung sino iboboto nyo dyan, ha?
ang mga drivers ay bigyan ng ayuda ng gobyerno. Bigyan po sila ng subsidy. Yung pong mga LGBTQ na inapi, kailangan palakasin natin ang
Gala talaga yan.
anti-discrimination laws. Ang mga may sakit, may kapansanan, PWD, kailangan bigyan din po natin ng proteksyon. Kasama na rin ang mga senior
Panoorin natin yung ngayon, mahalaga yan. Para mapakinggan nyo po.
At ang pinakamahalaga po sa akin sa ngayon, yung mga special children, kinakailangan po bigyan natin ng special education, libre at therapy. At kinakailangan po bigyan natin ng mga facilities. Ako po ay nakilala bilang tagapagtanggol ni Presidente Duterte at itutuloy
Attorney
ko po yan.
Panelo, sorry, you're out of time.
Salamat po.
Sino mga senatorial candidate dito?
Larry Gadon.
Attorney Larry Gadon. Yun!
While the employment rate of 92%, 92.2% in 2021 looks good, at unemployment rate natin is 7.8%. Karamihan dito ay puro panandalian trabaho lamang, sapagkat ito ay naglaan ang gobyerno ng 40 billion pesos para doon sa programa na tupad at doon sa GIP, yung Government Internship Program, at saka yung tulong panghanap buhay. Pero panandalian ito. Ang kinakailangan natin dito ay mga permanenteng trabaho, at kinakailangan natin ng micro-industrialization na magtatayo, mag-ihikaya tayo ng mga negosyante at mga investors na magtayo ng mga maliliit ang
Yan yung sinasabi ni Attorney Larry Gadon sa mga di ba?
Matugunan ang pagkawalan ng trabaho. At sa rice shortage naman, sa food security, hindi totoo na meron tayong rice shortage. Kung masusunod kung i-modernize natin ang ating post-harvest system, magmula sa pagpapatuyo ng palay at sa paggiling, meron pa tayong surplus na 3%. At yan ay dapat nating bigyan.
Panoorin lang natin sandali ito, ha? Panoorin lang natin sandali ito. Bago tayo pumunta sa topic natin, ha? Okay guys, panoorin lang natin sandali ito, ha?
Hindi sila makautang sa
At least
bangko.
nagsalita na si Attorney Larry Gadon. Abutan natin.
Pero kapag modernize natin, magkakaroon tayo ng rice sufficiency.
Thank you, Attorney Gadon. Ms. Lauren Legarda.
Salamat po. Bilang bilang chairman ng Senate Committee on Finance sa unang 3 taon ng Duterte administration.
Pakinggan lang natin muna si mga kapatilat sa Uniteam sa tayo pumunta sa topic natin mamaya.
Na kailangan natin para sa pandemic recovery is economic empowerment of every Filipino family. Kaya po yung pangkabuhayan law, gaya po ng DOLE Pangkabuhayan, DTI Shared Services Facilities, DOLE Tupad, ang ating DOST SES, iba't ibang mga DSWD Sustainable Livelihood Program must be institutionalized para po even after
Pagsalitain lang natin yung ating mga Uniteam.
magkatrabaho at
Tapos punta tayo sa,
ang
sa
mga
topic natin.
nangangailangan for pandemic recovery. Pangalawa po, yung One Tablet, One Student Act. 26 million po ang ating DepEd learners na wala pong sariling gadget. Ito po'y kailangan din ng mga estudyante sa SUC, 1.6 million. 80 billion pesos lang po ang kailangan sa 5 trillion pesos budget. Bilang chairman ng Senate Committee on Finance, alam ko po, kailangan gawin ito at kaya pong gawin. Ako po'y nagagalak na makatulong sa pag-enact ng free college education, universal healthcare law during the Duterte administration. Nakikita ko po, kailangan pa pong paigtingin, especially ang universal healthcare para sa pag-roll out ng ating mga healthcare programs.
Pakinggan lang natin yung mga Uniteam natin.
Thank you, Ms. Ligarda.
Kaya pag-uusapan natin yan mamaya kung dapat ba iboto.
Dante Marcoleta.
Yan na si Marcoleta.
Sa maraming nagawang programa ng administrasyon ni Pangulong Duterte, kailangan po nating maibaba ang singil ng kuryente sa ating bansa sapagkat ito po ang layunin ng batas na ito'y ginawa 21 taon na nakararaan. Ito po ay magbibigay ng sigla sa ating manufacturing sector na kung saan darami po ang trabaho at pag marami po ang trabaho ay maiibsan po ang kahirapan ng marami nating kababayan. Pagsisikapan din po natin na ayusin ang problema ng bumagsak na kalidad ng public education. Kailangan po nating ma-restructure yung
Pakinggan lang natin sila.
Ilagay po natin lahat
Yung mga Uniteam
ng mga
natin.
best practices ng mga bansang katulad ng Finland, ng Japan, at ng Singapore sapagkat tayo ay namumuhunan sa mga kabataan ng ating bansa. Kagaya po ng sinabi kanina, kailangan nating palakasin ang productivity ng agriculture sector. Mayaman ang ating bansa, mayaman ang lupa, mahirap po magsasaka. Malawak ang karagatan, ngunit kailangan pa nating mag-importa ng isda. Kailangan din po nating tutukan ang lumalalang problema ng korupsyon. Ang Commission on Audit po ay kailangan gamitin natin para bantayan, ma-prevent ang korupsyon, hindi para mag-ulat lamang ng mga anomalya at pangangulimbat na ginagawa. Yan po ay gagawin natin sa maraming pagkakataon kapag tayo po ay nanuklok sa Senado.
Yan si Atty. Marcoleta.
Thank you, Mr. Marcoleta. And finally, Attorney Harry Roque.
Yan na.
Dalawang bago po, dalawang luma. Unang-una po, ipagtataguyod pa rin natin ang kalusugan bilang nagsulong po ng universal healthcare sa bababang kapulungan. Alam ko po, ang pinakamalaking banta sa tagumpay ng universal healthcare ay korupsyon dyan sa PhilHealth. Kaya pinag-aaralan ko na po ang pagbubuwag ng PhilHealth, pagpapalit po ng National Health Service para ito po isang paraan na matanggal ang mga korap dyan sa PhilHealth at makinabang ang taong bayan sa universal healthcare.
Tama.
Nandyan din po yung pagbubuo ng isang bagong IATF na ang composition ay hindi lang po mga doktor, kundi mga negosyante, mga economists, mga sociologists, para pagdekaroon po ng bagong pandemya, maiiwasan po ang pagkagutom and at the same time, maiiwasan ang pagkalat ng sakit. Kailangan din mong isulong natin yung aking naihain na Zero Hunger Bill, itigil na po ang kagutuman sa Pilipinas sa loob ng 6 na taon, at ang Right to Water Bill, magbibigay na po tayo ng sapat, malinis na inumin pantubig para sa lahat ng Pilipino. At nandiyan din po
Pagsalitain lang natin yung mga Uniteam.
pinaglalaban, yung Freedom of Information Bill at saka yung Whistleblowers Act, dahil yung mga kaso po gaya ng extralegal killings at ang mga korupsyon, napakahirap po yung ipruebahan sa korte nang wala po tayong binibigyan na incentive sa mga whistleblowers o yung mga kasangkot na hindi naman nagkakasala na magbigay ng testimonya. Siyempre po, nandyan din yung ating proteksyon na dapat ibigay.
Papakinggan lang natin muna yung mga kasama natin sa
Binibigay
Uniteam.
natin sa mga testigo kapag may banta sa buhay, ibigay din po natin sa mga mamamayan.
Tama.
Magandang gabi po.
Yan yung sinasabi ni Harry Roque.
Attorney Roque, and thank you to all our senatorial candidates. Napakinggan na po natin ang kanilang mga paunang salita at susunod malalaman natin ang kanilang mga polisiya para tugunan ang problema ng ating bansa. Lahat ng yan sa pagbabalik ng
Ayun, no? Makita nyo, di ba? Sa ano pa lang yan, swipe pa lang yan ng ano, ng senatorial candidate. Sa tayo bibigay ng komento dyan mga katanso, no? Pero for the meantime, may mga topic naman talaga tayo ngayon. Ba, magandang senatorial candidate ngayon, mukhang palaban lahat. Alright, mga katanso, natagabisin nyo lahat. Ako, napanood lang ako sandali doon sa senatorial candidate, Diyos ko. Maganda kasi yung senatorial candidate, Diyos ko. Napakaganda ng senatorial candidate ngayon. Maganda yung laban, sobra. So, huminto lang ako para panoorin lang sandali yun. Grabe, no? Yan isa sa mga masarap pag-usapan ngayon. Yo, magbibigay ako ng komento dyan, pero unahin ko lang yung sinabi ni Pangulong Duterte. Pero unahin ko lang yung sinabi ni Pangulong Duterte. Alright. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, mga katanso. Magandang bisay niyo lahat. Thank you very much pa pag-aantay, no? Uniteam. Antayin ko lang iba, mga katanso natin. Ayun, kamusta? Lahat ngayon, tutok na tutok doon eh. Sobra, lahat, tutok na tutok doon. Ayan, mega love shoutout po muna ako kay kay Jean Somera. Ayan, present lagi sa ibig niya. Ayan, shoutout sa iyo Jean, shoutout sa iyo Ma'am Emily, shoutout din po kay Lea Aguilar. Ayan, shoutout yan. Oy, ano yan? Bilis Bilis nagpalit Ayan. Ayan, mega love shoutout po sa lahat ng mga katanso natin dyan. Shoutout po sa inyo. Ayan, maganda yung senatorial debate ngayon, no? Pag-usapan natin yan mamaya. And then, pero bago ang lahat, no? Mensaheng kapayapaan ni Bongbong Marcos muna tayo. At gusto lang natin ipahatid to sa inyo. Ayan, at may babalita rin ako sa inyong good news. Siyempre may good news ako sa inyo. Imposible walang good news. Siyempre, shoutout po kay Melda Dapas. Hello, Koy. Good evening din sa'yo. Good evening sa iyo, ma'am. Gandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Magandang gabi po. Ayan, no. May chichika ako sa inyo, May chichismis ako sa inyo. Ayan, alam nyo ba, may chichika ako sa inyo mamaya. Hello po, good evening po sa inyo, Emily Apolinar. Nagkipagkwentuhan lang ako sa inyo. Ganda nung sinabi ni Atty. Larry doon, no? Ako, agree ako doon sa sinabi ni Atty. Larry doon. Maganda yung ginagawa ni Atty. Larry doon. Pero nagtataka lang ako, di sila lumalabas sa surveys. Bakit sila lumalabas sa surveys? Pero nagtataka Bakit? Malakas naman si Atty. Larry doon. Ba't di lumalabas sa surveys? Ayan, shoutout kay Rodel Adriatico. Solid Uniteam tayo. Ayan, madami nagtatanong sa akin kung talaga iboboto nyo ba daw lahat ng Ate yung sagot ko. Yung sagot ako dun kung diba? Sabi dito ni May Santos, Koy, lahat ba ng Uniteam senators dapat iboto? 5 dapat na politiko ko Nako, yun hindi ko masasagot sa kanya. Pero sige, bibigay ako ng komento. Alam nyo, lagi pa nagko-komento ako. Laging yan Hello, Atty. Brent Vicente, Larry Marcoleta, saka Roque. Totoo ako, agree ako doon sa kanila. Protis Permina, magulang-gulang ko na kanina si Gadun. No? Ayan, mega love shoutout muna ako mga katanso natin. Ayan, kay Joy Kudo, nanonood sa atin yan. Ayan, kay Chinita Makulit, nanonood din sa atin. Silent viewing atin natin tayo. Mainit ang ulo Nakoy, sikoy. Ayan, shoutout sa Arcega family yan, Arcega family na nanonood sa atin yan. Ayan, mega love shoutout po kayo lahat. Commercial pa rin, wala pa eh. Ayun, oh. Commercial pa. Wait lang, commercial pa eh.
Halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago.
Commercial pa, wait lang ah.
Ang sandata sa ating hirap pagkaparating na ang pag-asa nating mga Pilipino. Kaya walang bibitaw, ilang araw na lang ang liwanag ililitaw. Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, magandang bukas ay tangaw.
Ayan, lumitaw na. Balikan tayo. Dali, balikan natin. May marites tayo. Wait lang. Uy, gastik, mamamatay. Panoorin natin to. Wait lang. Maganda to. Panoorin lang natin. Samahan niyo lang ako dito. Panoorin lang natin. Ayan na.
To be elected senator, we will indeed be heading towards a better Philippines. Thank you.
Pahinga lang.
My area of research is foreign policy, defense and security, so it will not be a surprise that my question will be within that particular issue area.
Ito, magaling magtanong yan.
The United States has just announced plans to deploy nuclear warheads in Japan. Ostensibly, this is part of the Indo-Pacific security umbrella, which is going to be established following the Quad, which is also working towards a collective security alliance. As a senator of the Republic, what will be your position in regard to this matter?
May magandang tanong niya.
The first candidate to answer this question is Ms. Attorney Balita.
Attorney Belen?
Carl Balita,
Attorney Agnes. Yes, it's really Mr. Balita.
Thank you for that question. You know, I trust that our participation and our collaboration with the democracies of the world will help us, and our mutual defense treaties and agreements with multilateral relationship with other countries should be talked towards that. As far as the Collective Security Alliance is concerned, the Quad that you have mentioned, Madam, I would presume that the world is watching, and I am confident that we are not in the mood for war post-pandemic. And the most that we can do is to strengthen our positioning, our defense capability, and to cushion the
Ngayon sasalita si Carl Balita. Sa mga hindi nakakaalam, yan yung Aksyon Demokratiko.
Fuel, food, and other related stuff. I would always be mindful that the democracies of the world in our alliances will be there to collaborate for a peaceful resolution of whatever conflict there are.
But would you have problems with having nuclear warheads in Japan, as U.S. has planned?
Well, certainly it's not for us to say, ma'am, but it's their decision. But I think the Quad itself, Japan being included in it, and the USA being included in it as well, would have better reasons for doing so. And our concern will always be our foreign policy, which should be inward-looking,
Yan, gandang gabi po
and
sa
our
inyo,
foreign
Mambina
policy that will
Israel
protect our
Martin
interests of the
Ato.
Filipinos and the Philippines, not only in the Philippines, but also in Japan and in America, where, you know, conflicts may just arise resulting from it. I will trust that the world is not in the mood for war, and that we are
Hindi naman talaga tayo pwede sumabak sa gera.
that
My
will
God.
influence each other in seeking peaceful resolution of whatever conflicts there could be.
Hindi pa capable ang Pilipinas.
Thank you,
If
Mr.
tatanungin
Balita.
niyo
And
ako.
apologies for the mix-up earlier. I have two lists, and we're going from left to right out since Attorney Bailens gave the first opening statement. So we will move on. Same question to Mr. Castriciones.
Okay, so of course, as always, whenever we talk about nuclear warheads, it creates a lot of fear amongst our people. And whether we like it or not, of course, we can never persuade the Americans not to pursue such
Magandang gabi po, Ma'am Barbie Kerubin. Nanonood kami sa
military plans for
SMNI.
that matter.
Yeah, thank you po.
But just the same, as part of the community of nations, we can actually choose where we have to side. And definitely, whether we would become neutral for as long as there would be threats from amongst these countries, the Philippines will always be a part of it. In fact, we all know that we can never isolate ourselves from the interaction of these countries, particularly the relationship between China and the United States of America.
Yes.
And
So,
for that
tutusin,
matter,
dapat
we
mo na
have to
maging
take
neutral ka
sides no
muna
matter
sa
what
ngayon kasi di ka naman pwede
happens. We have to
makipagsabayan.
put
May
a
point ka dun, ah.
position that would have to place our country in a way that we will be able to protect ourselves.
Yes, but similarly with Dr. Balita, would you have any problems with having nuclear warheads in Japan?
Of course, yes, ma'am. Definitely, if there would be nuclear warheads in Japan, then basically this would create some sort of a countermeasure coming from the countries that would be opposed.
Yan,
against
shoutout
such
muna ako kay
actions.
Alaskador
And,
Bisdak.
we
Thank you sa
all know
panonood,
that
Tol.
we
Thank you sa
recall the
shoutout,
Cuban
shoutout.
crisis, wherein the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics have actually placed the so-called missiles in Cuba, and definitely there was a reaction coming from the United States. And what will stop China from doing the same? And probably if this will escalate, it will create a war, and that is definitely a no-no for us.
Thank you.
Attorney Panelo.
Ma'am, as a senator, I will raise my voice of concern and apprehension. I'm against the deployment of nuclear warheads. We know for a fact that if you use that, it will be the end of the world. I do not think that any country would agree to the use of nuclear warheads. We have to use international diplomacy on whatever problems we have. We cannot be threatening people
Yes.
or countries with deployment of
Totoo yan,
warheads.
Yakuza
That is
Yukit.
precisely why we
Hindi
have
pwede sumali ang
international
Japan sa gera.
diplomacy. We
Alam nila
have
yan,
to
may
use
treaty na pinirmahan yan noon pa.
to solve whatever differences we have
Wait lang, ah.
between
Wait,
countries.
wait, wait. Wait.
Thank you.
No follow-up. Okay.
Wait lang,
Thank you,
wait lang.
Attorney Panelo.
Baka
Miss
makapiright eh.
Ricardo.
Ayan.
Having been the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, Professor Carlos, and our dear audience, I would always take into consideration the dimensions of foreign policy, namely economic, political, the welfare of overseas Filipinos, not just in Japan, but in all areas who will be affected by the deployment of these warheads, as well as perhaps cultural
Kahit
diplomacy.
naman tayo, di naman tayo nakadesenyo para sa
Every
gera.
stretch of that must be exhausted. As a student and administrator of national security, I would also take into consideration the 5 dimensions of national security, which would include socio-economic, political, even religious, and ecological dimension. All of these have to be discussed, not just by one senator, but at 24 man and woman Senate and the whole Congress, so that the Chief Executive could be advised accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Attorney Roque.
As a professor of international
Ayun na nga ang
law,
problema
I
dun.
submit that
Wala
nuclear
silang alam.
weapons are illegal. One, because they are incapable of distinction under the law of international
Ayan, pakinggan mo sinabi ni Roque, maganda.
Number two, they cause serious superfluous injury and unnecessary suffering. I am therefore against putting nuclear warheads in Japan. Secondly, it could run contrary not only to our constitution, which prescribes that the Philippines shall be a nuclear-free zone, it also runs contrary against an ASEAN treaty declaring the whole of ASEAN as nuclear-free. Number three, in terms of foreign policy, I believe that there should be strict adherence with the UN Charter. There should be strict adherence with Article 2.4 of that Charter, which prohibits the use of force, and the mere possession of nuclear weapons could constitute the threat of use of force, which is equally prohibited under the UN Charter, in the same way that actual use of nuclear force is prohibited. I enjoin all countries.
Hi, hello po. Magandang gabi po sa inyo, Ate Mabel Bilina. Mabel Bilina. MJ. Good evening, BNK, mga katanso natin. Good evening po.
But Harry, if this comes as part of the package of the Quad, what will your stand be?
As of now, we're not part of Quad, and I'm glad we're not. Because if we
Hindi
become
din
part
natin
of
Mabel.
Quad, we would inevitably be
Believe.
involved
Ate Mabel,
in an
believe
arms
na.
race and might be involved in a conflict that will not have anything to do with our national interest. Our national interest is to achieve prosperity, to be friends with our neighbors in particular. We have no fight with any country, and we have no wish to be dragged into any armed conflict.
Galing niya, ano?
But since your mutual defense treaty has not been abrogated and is still in force, we continue to be a defense ally of the U.S. So,
We are, but for all intents and purposes, that's a dead treaty. Because when China took away two of our islands, the United States did not come to our assistance. That's a dead treaty.
Yeah,
thank you.
galing niya.
Mr. Marcoleta.
The warheads, Madam, are a source of fear and concern for all humanity. That is why, as an elected senator, I will air my concern.
Oo nga, ate. Ngayon na ng time. Thank you sa pagbisita sa biyahe ni Ko, ate. Actually, na-late din ako.
And by the state policy that our country has to pursue an independent foreign policy, and it also talks about our relationship with other states.
Wala akong pakialam sa'yo, William Lim. Lumayas ka dito.
Primordial consideration, our
Doon
national
ka.
sovereignty,
Remove.
territorial integrity,
Layas.
national interest, and the right to self-determination. And guided by that, Madam, I'd like to advise the administration that we have a UN charter to uphold, that these warheads are really prohibited under the law, under the charter, and therefore we should abide by the charter, and we should take the diplomatic course in every issue that confronts the world and in our country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ganda yung sinabi ni
No
Marcoleta.
follow-up question from Professor Carlos. Thank you, Attorney Marcoleta. Attorney Gadon.
I do not agree, or I do not agree to the idea that the US should deploy warheads in Japan, because it will only escalate the tension between China and the US. And since we are...
Uy, Ate Mabel, salamat po. Thank you po, Ate Mabel Bilina.
Whatever tension or hostilities that may arise in the future. So I am not in favor of it. And if we should learn our lesson from the Ukraine, the US has been posturing for the defense of the Ukraine, and they did not. Russia invaded it. And when you talk about the 1952 treaty, the defense treaty, as Secretary Roque pointed out, hindi na yun applicable.
So that means if you are a senator, you will abrogate the mutual defense treaty.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. And even I will even urge the government not to enter into this.
Kasi gagawa tayong bago. Tama naman siya, Attorney Larry Gadon.
Well, yes, I would rather adopt the neutrality stand.
Talaga maging neutral ka kasi hindi pa kaya ng bansa natin lumaban. Tama sinabi ni Attorney Larry Gadon, galing.
Well, I think there are already nuclear warheads in Japan. This is the defense policy of the United States. But for the Philippines, our constitution does not allow us to have nuclear arms or nuclear warheads in our possession. So my view is that the nuclear warheads have provided a security ambit to Japan, and I think the United States...
Kalmado pa si Clarita Carlos talaga.
The best security is to have a good defense. In the part of the present war between Russia and Ukraine, Ukraine was very neutral, was a peaceful country. The invasion was unprovoked. And yet, Russia has put into activation its nuclear forces. I believe that we should settle disputes peacefully.
Attorney Olarte, sorry.
Thank you.
We're out of time. Mr. Albani.
in the name of God, the most compassionate and the most merciful. I think we have been in war since memorial. From the First World War and Second World War, nakikita natin that nobody wins in wars. So, para sa
Nasa po
akin, we
pala
have to
senador
define
to.
our baseline. We have to be in the position to negotiate in favor of our sovereignty. Consistent must be based in history, culture, tradition, and it is not based with the Western colonialism. So I disagree, and at the same time, we will not support on that nuclear war. We have to be in a neutral position because kawawa ang sambayan ng Pilipino. Tulad ng sinabi ko, we have been in war since memorial. Nobody win in war.
True. Walang nananalo sa gera. Lahat talo. May mga namamatay. Totoo, tama ang sinabi niya.
Yes, not only do I disagree, we must in fact protest. The United States is playing a dangerous game in our region. First, it is already worse that the US pursues a policy of containment against China. And when you do that, history has proven us when a superpower is contained, just like in World War II, how Germany felt constricted by the Western powers, it resulted in World War II. And now we are witnessing the same policy of containment in Russia, and now we have war. Now, it's not only that the United States contains China, the United States is trying to escalate by putting nuclear warheads in Japan. Definitely, that's a very, very dangerous game. It will lead to war. We must, in fact, protest against this act.
Kasi ipapahamak ng Amerika ang Japan kung tutuusin. Pag-play safe muna sila. Galing, di ba?
Mutual Defense Treaty?
Yes, I do, but I would like to add that I disagree with the statement a while ago that we have to pick sides. That means, if you don't pick the United States, then we'll pick China. I totally disagree with that. We don't pick the US, we don't pick China. We must have an independent foreign policy. And in fact, we must talk to our neighbors and have a non-aligned formation in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, but is sitting on the fence a viable foreign policy?
That's actually
to sit on the fence?
That's actually not sitting on the fence. That is charting our own
Well, you
independent
said
foreign
you
policy.
don't want to take sides, so you're sitting on the
Yari
fence.
daw.
No, that's not sitting on the fence, ma'am. That is, in fact, making a choice that we, our
Lusutan mo yan.
future as a nation, our interest as a nation, should not be tied to the interest of these two superpowers, and we have no choice. We'll just have to choose sides.
Ang
That's
galing.
not sitting on the fence. That is choosing our side, the side of the Filipino people, our national interest.
So para sa kanya kasi gusto niyang magkaroon tayong sariling soberenya talaga na kaya natin lumaban as we are the superpower. Same time na ginagawa ni Pangulong Marcos.
Address to Attorney Roque and Attorney Gadon. Okay, their positions were, which they stated that
Sabog.
the mutual defense
Sunog
treaty
siya
is a
agad
better
dun.
law. If elected in the Senate, what would you do? Would you do some saber rattling in the Senate? Would you file a resolution to drive the last nail into the coffin of the mutual defense treaty?
Unfortunately, Attorney Suplico, the latest decision of the Supreme Court in this regard says that the power to terminate a treaty is an executive function. It is not a decision to be made by the Senate. That is the recent decision, Pangilinan versus Executive Secretary. Having said that, we can still pass legislation if we want, declaring the country again as nuclear-free zone and providing for punishment in case it is violated.
Attorney Gadon?
If we can effectively remove the U.S. bases here, the military bases, so why can't we remove the 1952 Defense Treaty? It has been proven that the U.S. will not come to our aid when hostilities would break out. Well, look what's happening in our proxy war with China. The U.S. is just using us as a pawn. So we might as well abrogate the treaty.
Yeah, but you have not driven away the Americans. They are in 5 military bases under the EDCA. So, they're here. And because we agreed to the EDCA, isn't it?
But those are just executive agreements, Madam.
No, I'm questioning because you said earlier that we don't allow foreign forces here. They are here, and they are here because we agreed to them being here in 5 military bases in the EDCA, under the EDCA.
Yes, but those are temporary stays only, Madam.
Tama.
If you will recall my answer, we have removed the U.S. military installations and bases here. Not necessarily the joining of exercises with U.S. soldiers. That is a different matter. And in fact, we can also abrogate the EDCA because that is just an executive agreement.
Magaling sumagot si Atty. Larry Gadon. Galing.
Questions, we'll move on back to the original question of Professor Carlos. And last but not the least, we have Attorney Bailen.
I view with grave concern the deployment of nuclear warheads in Japan. First and foremost, there's a saying in international relations that there is no permanent friends nor permanent enemies in international law. And during World War II, we know how the United States tried to impose sanctions, economic sanctions, when it knew that Japan was trying to assert its military powers. And that's why it tried to contain. There was an embargo, and when Japan was pushed to the wall, it has no other way to go but to declare war. They were trying really to reach the president at the time, but they were really pushed to the wall. That's why I'm very, very concerned, because we are supposed to be the allies. And then all of a sudden, they would put the nuclear warheads there. But of course, can they put it in the Philippines? No, because our constitution prohibits it. So essentially, there's got to be a twist of the balance of power here if it's going to be deployed here.
Any follow-up, Professor Carlos?
Yeah, well, it's a follow-up, but it's not a follow-up because I want to ask Agnes if, since you don't want Japan to be the anchor of the Quad, are you relying on the ASEAN political security community being realized sometime like, they have targeted 2025 actually?
Kasi pwede sila pwedeng gamitin ng US ang Japan for
consensual organization.
para sumausaw doon sa gulo ng Russia. May point din naman may point din naman siya. Galing. Ang galing magtanong ni Carlita Carlos.
In a positive way. Because it's supposed to be, it's just a consensus, but right now, it's really playing a very, very major role right now in this particular region. So, and besides, ASEAN it didn't really
Apologies, Attorney Bailen, you're out of time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one more follow-up there, Agnes, no? But we committed already to the ASEAN political security community. For 2025 is the target date. We committed to that. So it's not anything that, you set aside because it's part of the troika of the community, the three communities, economic, political security, and social culture. What I'm saying is because you're rejecting Japan as the anchor country of the Quad, because it's really the anchor country of the Quad, then that means you must have a fallback.
Yeah, if I remember, ma'am, ASEAN also entered relations. Also, we invited China when ASEAN was starting to flex its muscle. The United States, Australia, they were invited. So I think there is a need to review really why is a need to deploy nuclear warheads in Japan at this particular time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Bailen. Thank you, Professor Carlos, and congratulations to our candidates for surviving Professor Carlos in the first round. We'll be hearing from other panelists in the next segment of our debate. So don't go away. SMNI Senatorial Debate 2022 will be back.
Napakinggan nyo nga. Abangan na nito, makikichismis tayo dito. Maganda to.
Dumating na, kailangan nyo palatandaan na nga ito.
natin yung sasabihin pa nila doon. Maganda-ganda yung debate ngayon in fairness Yan, maganda yung debate ngayon, sobra. Kakapulutan mo talaga ng ng mga story talaga to. Mamaya magbibigay ako ng reaction dyan, huwag kayo mag-alala.
Lahat ng makabongbong Sara, itaas ang kamay at wag na wag kayong mabahala. Hindi na to panaginip at hindi na rin nakala. Silang dalawa'y nagsama para base sumaga. Kaya ano pa ang hinihintay? Tayo magsama-sama para sa ating tagumpay. Magkakaroon na tayo ng maunlad na buhay. Dahil si Bongbong at Sara sa bisyo ay tunay. Ikaw ay aming iniimbita. Halika na tayo magkaisa. Gusto mo rin bang umula kang masa? Tara na wag na magpapawa pa. Dahil ito na nga ang umpisa. Ang Pilipinas sa baba na. Dahil hindi magpapapigil kaya lahat ng mga Pilipino ay may nakilala. BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara. Tara halina magkaisa para sa isang mitin. BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara. Tara halina magkaisa para sa isang mitin. BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara. Tara halina magkaisa para sa isang mitin. BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara. Tara halina magkaisa para sa isang mitin. BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara. Halina magkaisa para sa isang mitin. Halina't isigaw mo. Ito na ang simula ng
Ayan, mga katansono, inaantay lang natin na magkaroon ng
Parating na ang pag-asa
Takpan ko lang to, baka
nating mga
makatry tayo.
Pilipino. Kaya walang bibitaw, ilang araw na lang
Kalma lang, kalma lang.
Nililitaw, Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao,
Ayan. Thank you po, Ma'am Janet Ortega. Maraming salamat sa panonood. Tinakpan ko lang yung sa Facebook kasi baka maka-copyright claim tayo niya.
Asahang may paraan dahil ang kahalagahan ng buhay.
Kadali pa tayo.
Ang bawat isa ay di namin mangamba sa ating bansa. Dahil ang pinakahihintay nating lahat ay lalapit na. Wala na hanapin pa.
Sabi ko nga sa inyo. Maganda yung debate ngayon dito. So, panoorin mo natin siya para makita natin yung mga platform nila. And then, besides nila, gusto ko yung mga gusto ko yung mga sinasabi nila. It's about time to, pagkakataon na ni Attorney Harry Roque at saka ni Marcoleta at Gadon para magpakilala. So, maganda rin yun. Ako, agree ako dun. Agree ako dun. Agree naman ako dun. Kung ano yung sasabihin nila. But for me, yun ang inasabayan.
Wala nang pangangamba. Tayo ay magiging sama.
Kaya salamat din. Shoutout sa SM.
Sabay-sabay tayo.
Magsahatay natin.
Alisin ka lapit. Tayo ay panalihain. Malahap ang sariwang hangin. Hangarin pagbabago. Gaya ng ipinangako. Ay siyang
Ayan, no? Okay lang kahit manood kayo sa channel ng Seminary. Ako, nagko-commento na ako dito. Sumasabay lang ako.
Walang babalik ang sigla. Sa kabila ng everyday na malagi ang mahalaga. Makulay ang buhay na parang mga bata.
Oy, abangan nyo ako sa Masbate, ha? Punta tayo ng Masbate, eh. Sa lahat ng mga katanso natin, yan, pupunta po tayo ng Masbate. Watching you from Japan, Cookie, Mikoto na lang ang pangalan mo, te. Hindi ako makapagbakbak, eh. yung first name mo kasi, hindi ko mapagkit. Alright? Hindi ko mabasa, eh. Yun, bukas yan.
Ito na ang simula ng pagbabago. Ang sandata sa ating hirap kapag parating na ang pag-asa natin mga Pilipino.
Ayan, kanta nga pa ng Aladdin Records yan sa mga nagtatanong sa akin. Yan po yung kanta ng Aladdin Records. Yaki Nikoy, good evening, Yaki Bayola, good evening sa'yo. Bakit naman idol Japanese ni...
Halina't isigaw mo. Ito na ang simula ng
Sorry, di ko talaga Bikoto, di ko talaga mabanggit. Diyos ko.
pag-asa nating mga Pilipino.
Hindi ko talaga mabanggit yung pangalan mo sa umpisa. Sorry, Mikoto. Nahirapan ako. Hindi ko mabanggit, Mikoto.
Kailangan nyo
Kahit Japanese name pa yan. Yaki Bayola, natawa rin si Yaki. Yaki, kaya mo banggitin? Sige, banggitin mo, Yaki. Ako, di ko mabanggit eh.
Ikaw ay aming iniimbita. Halika na tayo magkakita.
Yan na, mga katanso.
Gusto mo rin bang umala naman sa
Yan mga katanso.
tara na wag na
Nagbabalik ang SMNI Senatorial Debate 2022. At sa pagpapatuloy natin, ang magtatanong naman ay si Attorney Rolex Suplico. But bago ko siya patanungin ang kanyang question to our candidates, I have a question for Professor Carlos. Ma'am, I noticed that you're wearing your sunglasses even if there's no sun anymore. Baka po pwede niyong i-share sa amin bakit po kayo naka-shades today?
Oh my Lord. How did I explain this stupidity? You know, I just had cataracts removed. And those damn lights, you know, they're so bright. They were not there 2 weeks ago. Si Rolex kasi may kasalanan eh. Dapat pinalitan ko. So, may I beg your indulgence, please? I didn't mean to be impolite, no? Wearing this and I know, hindi nga ako nasa beach, no? Karen, apologies, ha? Apologies, please. Magiging 75 din kayo, kaya nalimutan ko magpalit. Salamat, Karen.
No, thank you, Professor Carlos, and I'm very happy to hear that you didn't enter the witness protection program. I was worried for you for a while. Okay. So our next question is from Attorney Rolex Suplico. Attorney Rolex.
Madamong salamat. Alam niyo po, marami nanonood dito. Yung nakaraang SMNI debates
Kaya,
sa mga
baliting ko.
presidential balls. I think parang tumamang 3 milyon ang nanood. So ang tanungan ko po ganito. 11 po kayong tumatakbo sa pagka miyembro ng Senado. Pwede ba malaman kung anong job description ng isang senador?
Job description.
For Attorney Suplico's question, first to answer is Mr. Castriciones.
Salamat, Panyera. Okay, unang-una po, sa katanungan po ni Attorney Suplico ay gumawa ng batas, humubog ng batas. Yan po ang unang-unang gagawin dapat ng isang senador. At dahil nandito ay kailangan po niya ng makipagkonsultasyon sa lahat po ng mga mamamayang Pilipino, lalong-lalo na sa mga batas na kanyang dapat gagawin. Pangalawa, ang isang senador ay dapat pong did I get you right, sir?
Yes.
Ang senador po ay kailangan po siyang mag-conduct po ng mga investigasyon tungkol po sa mga bagay na dapat pong ang tawag nila
Putulin ko muna yung
in-aid
Facebook,
legislation.
Wait lang,
Ano po?
Putulin
At
ko na yung
sana po ay
Facebook.
maiwasan natin yung in-aid of election. Yan po yung pangalawa. Pangatlo, kailangan po natin ang senador po ay kailangan pong gumawa po ng tinatawag natin ng mga desisyon tungkol sa mga treaties na dapat pong pasukan po ng ating pong pamahalan sa iba't ibang bansa. Yan po ay isa sa mga tungkulin ng isang senador.
Well, ang inquiries in aid of legislation ay subject to abuse. Is it?
Yes, sir. Definitely, as we have seen in many of the events that have transpired when they invite the so-called resource persons, that instead of asking questions that are relevant to the inquiry that is being made, they are being subjected to humiliation and embarrassment. I think this should be avoided at all. Otherwise, this will be just prone to abuse.
Alam niyo po, after taking the bar, nagtrabaho ako sa Senado. At noong panahon ni Senate President Tobito R. Salonga. At dito sa recent investigation ng Pharmaly,
ay napag-alaman ko na wala palang resolution. So therefore, walang parameters. And thus, subject to abuse.
Tama po yun. Yan nga pong sinasabi ko na kung minsan ay nagagamit po ito bilang in aid of election and grandstanding. Sana po ay maiwasan ito. We should have the parameters within which we have to ask questions directly to the resource persons who are actually related to the issues that are being asked. Tama po.
Thank you, Attorney Casasones. Attorney Panelo.
Alam po ninyo, yung batayan ng lahat na nahalal sa pamahalaan, kung kahit man ito ay appointed, ay yung sinabi ko kanina na ang pangunahing tungkulin ng pamahalaan ay maglingkod at magbigay ng proteksyon sa sambayanan. Kaya dapat ang senador, ang gagawin niya po yung mga panukalang batas na tutugon sa lahat ng pangangailangan ng sambayanang Pilipino. Lalong-lalo na po yung mahirap sapagkat ito'y sa lahat. Sa lahat sa yaman, sa lahat ng kagamitan, lahat ng pag-aari. Yan po ang unang dapat na gawin ng isang senador. Pangalawa, yung kung sinasabing investigation, alam po ninyo, kontrang-kontra ako doon. Kung ikaw ay may ebidensya at kung ikaw ay isang abogado, nakikita mo na wala namang kahihinatnan ng isang resolution para mag-imbestiga, dapat kontrahin yan. Huwag nang ituloy yan sapagkat sasayang ka lang ng pera ng bayan at magkakaroon ka lamang ng mga sigalot internal na conflict sa loob ng Kongreso.
Thank you, Attorney Panelo. Ms. Legarda.
Maliwanag po na ang trabaho ng isang senador ay gumawa ng batas. At sa lahat ng batas na ginagawa sa higit na 30 komite, ay ang pinakamalaga ay ang GAA. Yan po ang General Appropriations Act na siya nagbibigay ng ngipin, the heart and the soul of all government programs. Napalad po tayo na 5 taon po ay nagawa po natin naturuan at natulungan ang Duterte administration. Importante po ang pagbibigay po ng buhay sa mga batas because we have billions of unfunded laws. Kailangan po paggagawa ng batas ay lalagay din po ang nakalaan na pondo para po makabenepisyo naman ng mga tao. Ang mga batas na ginagawa po ay dapat pondohan, dapat din may oversight function para po alam din natin, may benepisyo ba ang mga tao? Hindi lang nakasulat na maganda sa debate, tapos hindi naman po nakikinabang ang taong bayan. Unfunded laws, kailangan siyasatin po natin. Sayang naman po ang mga debate kung hindi naman po nakikinabang ang taong bayan.
Karen, follow-up question to Senator Legarda. Ma'am, paano natin mapipigil ang pangurakot sa pork barrel? Alam ko na kayo po dating chairperson ng Senate Finance Committee. At ang pork barrel po ay isang mahalagang issue na pinag-usapan palagi. Kasi po minsan dumarating yung punto may bit-bit na kontraktor eh. In fact, sabi ni Greco Bellica, 10 to 15% daw advance payment doon.
God damn it, Greco Bellica.
Napakahalaga po yan. Unang-una po, ang senador o ang congressman ay hindi po humahawak ng pondo. Ang mga ahensya po ng gobyerno, dahil 3 nga ang branch ng government sa legislatura, hindi po sa kanila. Nasa executive department po yan. Kaya binanggit ko po, ang trabaho po ng senador at congressman, yung oversight function po ay napakahalaga. Ibig sabihin po, striktuhan po ng siyang implementing agency, DAR, DA, DepEd, para po ang procurement arm po ng mga ahensya ng gobyerno ay hindi po bibigay sa mga layon, kung masama man ang layon ng legislatura na makailang sa implementasyon.
So, klaro ma'am, no? Ang trabaho ng mambabatas,
Gumawa ng batas,
hindi bumit-bit ng projects.
Gumawa ng batas po at oversight para po maging epektibo ang pag-implement, pero hindi po mamimili kung sino po ang mag-i-implement. Yan po ay sa executive department at sa procurement arm ng DBM.
Maraming salamat po.
Attorney Roque.
Well, nasabi na po lahat ni Senator Legarda dahil siya ay 3-termer senador na. No? Siguro po ang dadagdag ko na lang is when we talk of legislation, we talk of policy. Ano ba yung mga policy ang sinasabi natin? Ito yung mga bagay-bagay na nakakabuti, hindi lang sa ating mga mga Pilipino, kundi nakakabuti sa lahat ng mga mamamayan sa buong mundo. That is why we say law is part of a normative system. It encourages conduct that is beneficial to us, discourages conduct that is not beneficial to us. But in addition to legislation, which is the primary obligation and job of a senator, there is also oversight. Because in our system of government, binigay po kapangyarihan sa tatlong sangay ng gobyerno na co-equal. At they are supposed to serve as check and balance. At meron din pong papel na pinapapilan ang ating Senado pagdating sa foreign policy, yung concurrence ng treaty. Pero gaya po sinabi ni Senator Legarda, no public funds shall be spent without consent of the people, kaya importante po yung pagpasa ng pantaunang budget.
A follow-up question to Atty. Roque. Ang trabaho ng mambabatas ay gumawa ng batas. Matagal na tayo walang divorce law. Are you willing to sponsor a divorce law?
Well, unang-una po, meron po tayong tinatawag na annulment sa family code. Siguro po, to balance between yung paniniwala ng mayorya ng mga Katoliko sa Pilipinas at yung mga naniniwala na couple should have a second chance pag sila'y nagkamali, siguro po gawin natin mas madali yung declaration of nullities nang sa ganon, it serves the purpose of promoting family life, a healthy and happy family life, and a way out for those who really make mistakes.
No follow-up question, so we'll move on to Attorney Marcoleta.
Dalawa po ang gawain ng isang senador. Una po ay yung legislative function at saka yung constituent function.
Tama.
Sa legislative function po ay nagagamit yung tinatawag na formal inquiry in aid of legislation at kasama na rin po yung oversight function. Pero hindi po dapat na ito'y abusuhin sapagkat kagaya ng nangyari itong kamakailan lamang ay imbes na po gamitin sa paghihimay sa implementasyon kung talagang matutukan yung pamamalakad ng batas na ginawa ay nagamit po sa ibang paraan. Meron po kasing desisyon ng Korte Suprema na kapag ka gumagawa ka ng investigative function ay hindi dapat prosecution sapagkat hindi ibinigay sa Senado yung tungkulin na prosecute sapagkat yan ay para sa National Prosecution Service lamang at sa Korte. So meron din pong constituent function, kinakailangan mong konsultahin ang constituents mo para sa ganun makapagbalangkas po kayo ng batas na naayon po sa pangangailangan ng ating bansa. Yan po yung dalawang kailangang mapanagutan ng isang senador.
Well, I have the same follow-up question to Congressman Marcoleta. Are you willing to sponsor a divorce law in this country?
Hindi po, sapagkat ako'y naniniwala in the sacredness of marriage dito sa ating bansa. Considering na ang pamilya ay siya pong pinakabasihan o batayan ng ating lipunan, ang gusto ko po'y mapalakas yan. Ang gusto ko pong gawin ay makagawa ng mga batas na lalong magpalakas sa ating mga pamilya at kung mayroong mga problema, gumawa rin tayo ng paraan na matulungan sila para mapangalagaan po ang pagsasama ng mag-asawa. Alang-alang na rin po sa katatagan ng ating lipunan.
Attorney Gadon.
Ang job description ng senador para sa akin ay yung paggawa ng mga batas at yung pag-review ng mga batas na dapat ng palitan. At ang pagsulong ng mga bills na makakatulong sa administrasyon. Although ideally the separation of powers between the legislature and the executive is promoted by the Constitution, hindi naman yan nangangahulugan yan na dapat sila mag-away. Kung kinakailangan ng executive ng mga batas na makakapagsulong ng kanilang programa, yun ay aking susuportahan. At ang isa pang hindi ako agree na trabaho ng mga senador ay yung mag-imbestiga. Dapat yan sa DOJ na yan o kaya sa COA o sa Ombudsman. Dapat ganun.
Well, follow-up question to Attorney Gadon. No? Ang Family Code of the Philippines, no? EO 209, ay nagsasabi na ang marriage ay maaring permanenteng union sa lalaki at sa babae. Mag-sponsor ba kayo ng amendment dito para payagan ang same-sex marriage dito sa ating bansa?
Hindi. Ginagalang ko ang mga karapatan ng mga LGBT. Marami akong kaibigan sa kanila. Ang iba sa kanila very talented. Pero hindi ako naniniwala na magkakaroon ng kasal between same-sex person. At ako naniniwala pa rin dun sa sanctity and yung sa pagiging basic institution ng marriage. Kasi ano yan diyan ka magtatayo ng iyong pamilya. Kaya yung same-sex, hindi ako pabor doon.
To the point, sinabi na Attorney Larry Gato.
Attorney Olarte.
Ang function po ng Senado is to legislate laws that will promote the public welfare and the public good. And also is oversight function. Ang ayaw ko po na ginagawa ng Senado at saka yung Kongreso is when they invite resource persons and they ask questions from the resource persons, and if the resource person answers are not in favor with their opinion, then they insult the resource person. That is a very big no-no to me, because the resource person are private people and they are more knowledgeable in the sphere of knowledge that they bring to the Congress.
Alam mo, Panyero, follow-up question, Karen. Doon sa Blue Ribbon Committee, bawal magsalita ng abogado doon eh. Hindi ko makita paano mo madepensahan yung kliyente mo nung tinatawag doon. Would you have any comments?
Well, I do not agree with that, na hindi makapagsalita ang abogado. If there are important matters that the lawyer can contribute for the public good and to make the bill better, to improve legislation, then why not? The committee head should allow it.
Thank you.
Mr. Albani.
In the name of God, the most compassionate and the most merciful. Ang trabaho po bilang isang aplikant sa Senado ay gumawa ng batas. Kaya po kung mamarapatin ang gagawin natin batas, yung tinatawag na cooperativism. We will create a system para ang lahat ng sambayanan Pilipino, ang karamihan, hindi na siya mag-abroad at dito na magtrabaho sa atin. Sapagkat ang kalaban natin ngayon, kung makikita natin, kung maisabatas natin ang cooperative system sa bansa natin in the form of decentralization, makikita natin dito sa bansa, ang kalaban natin, hindi si pula, hindi si puti, kundi ang kahirapan ng ilang bayan. We are under the economic bankruptcy. So ito pong batas gagawin natin, tudukan natin ang kahirapan sa bansa.
So, follow up. So, anong tingin niyo po ang job description ng isang senador?
Job description ng senador ay gumawa ng batas, polisiya, upang magkaroon ng equal footing of justice. Kaya bilang isang kapatid niyong Muslim, tumatakbo kami upang marinig naman ang hangarin namin. Because ngayon, we have 24 senators in our country, 21 in Luzon, 3 in Visayas, 9 in Mindanao. So, para marinig ang bayan natin, ng sambayan ng Pilipino, we have to give chance for the Muslim brother.
Attorney Espiritu.
Ang sistema ng demokrasya natin ay representative democracy. Therefore, kung representative democracy yan, dapat ang katangian ng isang senador o qualification ng isang senador ay sinisilbihan niya o nire-represent niya yung interest ng majority, hindi ng minority. Sino ba ang majority? Ang majority, ang mga manggagawa, ang masang Pilipino, ang mga maralita. Sino ang minority? Ang mga bilyonaryo, pasindero, businessman, negosyante, at ang interest dapat ng mas nakararami ang sinisilbihan niya. Ang kasamaang palad, 95% of our laws is about protection of private property, is the protection of the interest of the property holders. Kaya ang hirap ngayon, ang hirap maging public interest lawyer. Didepensahan mo ang manggagawa, talo ka parati. Kasi ang batas natin sa proteksyon ng kapitalista. Didepensahan mo yung mga pinapalayas ng mga urban poor, mahirap mong depensahan. Bakit? Para doon sa land grabber ang desisyon. Kaya our lawmakers have failed us.
So, follow-up question, Attorney Espiritu. Pag kayo po'y mapalarin at mahalal bilang senador, ano kayang kaunang-unahang Senate bill ang ipa-file nyo?
Nasabi ko na kanina, yung regulation, totoong security of tenure law, bawagin ang mga manpower agencies, at dadagdagan ko pa. Kailangan ang sweldo ng mga manggagawa ay 750, daily minimum wage, at buwagin ang mga regional wage boards, dapat isa lang ang minimum wage sa ating bansa.
then that will promote or that will serve the interest of the majority.
Thank you.
Attorney Bailen.
Ang trabaho ng isang senador ay gumawa ng batas. So ang gagawin po natin, gagawa po tayo ng batas na talagang tututok po talaga sa kailangan ng mamamayan natin ngayon. Alam naman po natin, baksak ang ekonomiya natin ngayon, unti-unti po bumabangon, pero kailangan pa po natin i-accelerate. Ang sabi nga ng kasama ko po na tumatapos na si Attorney Luke nga, na representante, kung titignan nga natin ngayon, kami ni Congresswoman Lauren Legarda, dalawa lang kaming babae. Mas maraming botanteng babae. Kaya dapat mas maraming senador na babae ngayon. Kasi ang pagbabae ang nakaupo ay magiging more compassionate, more inclusive development at may mga studies po dito. Pangalawa po, ano pang trabaho? Ayun nga po, legislative inquiry in aid of legislation. So pagkatapos, dapat po, nung investigation, meron pong kasamang batas na nagawa. Meron ka bang i-amend? Meron ka bang i-repeal? So ayun po, at budget, kailangan po nakatutok po yung budget sa kailangan.
Thank you, Attorney Bailen. And finally, Mr. Balita.
Sabi na po nilang lahat, copy paste na lang. Pero meron po, sanay po ako mag-interview, sanay po ako magbigay ng job description. Meron po silang hindi nasabing lahat. Ang senador ay kailangan maging mabuting halimbawa sa sambayan ng Pilipino, sa pagmamahal sa Pilipinas. Ang job description niya, hindi siya dapat corrupt. Hindi siya dapat gumastos ng kalahating bilyon or 500 million pesos at the very least. Ng kanilang mga sweldo, hindi po maabot ng 200,000.
Alam
Ang
yan.
makapagbigay siya ng inspirasyon sa Pilipino,
Ay, ginagawa ni
ng
Isko.
Pilipinas, ang gumabay sa mga Pilipino para iangat ang kanyang
Grabe
kinalalagyan.
naman.
At gawing hindi franchise ang Senado ng pamilya at hindi maging lifetime career ang Senado.
Ang galing mo si Trilon.
Binibigay ang tinatawag nating soft skill or ang hindi na isusulat na job description. Subalit dapat maramdaman ng Pilipino na pinaglilingkod.
Ano ginagawa ni Trilon ngayon doon? Tagal na nakaupo nun. Tama ka naman doon, Carl Balita. Pero yung problema ni Isko na bilyon.
Thank you, Attorney Alex Supico, for your question. We will be hearing from the other two panelists. SMNI Senatorial Debate 2022 will be back.
Ano ginagawa ni Isko dun?
Para sa isang team dumating na, kailangan nyo palatandaan ng nga ito na magbubuklod ang mga tao.
Laugh trip pero si Carl Balita. Siya pa yung pinakalas. Siya pa yung pinakalas na nagsalita. Grabe ah. So anyway, bahala na kayong muska dyan. Mananorin lang natin sila.
Tara na wag na magpabago pa, dahil ito na nga ang umpisa. Ang Pilipinas ay babago na, dahil hindi magpapapigil. Kaya lahat ng mga Pilipino ay minapili na. BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara. Tara halina magkaisa para sa isang mitin. BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara. Tara halina magkaisa para sa isang mitin. Lahat ng makabongbong Sara, itaas ang kamay at wag na wag kayong mabahala. Hindi na to panaginip at hindi na rin akala. Silang dalawa'y nagsama para base sumagana. Kaya ano pa ang hinihintay? Tayo magsama-sama para sa ating tagumpay. Magkakaroon na tayo ng maunlad na buhay, dahil si Bongbong at Sara sa bisyo ay tunay. Ikaw ay aming iniimbita, halika na tayo magkaisa. Gusto mo rin bang umula ang masa? Tara na wag na magbabago pa, dahil ito na nga ang umpisa. Ang Pilipinas ay babago na, dahil hindi magpapapigil. Kaya lahat ng mga Pilipino ay minapili na. BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara. Tara halina magkaisa para sa isang mitin. BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara. Tara halina magkaisa sabihin BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara. Halina't magkaisa para sa isang mitin. Halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago. Ang sandata sa ating hirap, pagkat parating na ang pag-asa nating mga Pilipino. Kaya walang bibitaw, ilang araw na lang ang liwanag ililitaw. Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, magandang bukas ay tanaw. Kapayapaan at malasakit ang solusyon sa pinagdaraanan natin. Kaya tiwala kasabay ng panalangin, handang itama ang maling nakaraan. Asahang may paraan dahil ang kahalagahan ng buhay ay pagmamahalan. Ang bawat isa ay di namin nangamba sa ating bansa. Dahil ang pinakahihintay natin lahat ay malapit na. Wala nang hahanapin pa, muling babalik ang sigla. Sa kabila ng epidemyang namalagi, ang mahalaga mapuloy ang buhay na parang mga bagay. Kaya tayo na halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago. Ang sandata sa ating hirap, pagkakarating na ang pag-asa nating mga Pilipino. Halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago. Ang sandata sa ating hirap, pagkakarating na ang pag-asa nating mga Pilipino. Ang sarap gumising nang wala nang pangangamba. Tayo ay magiging sama kasi sasaya. Sabay-sabay tahakin ang alis ang balakid. Tayo ay palalayain, malanghap ang sariwang hangin. Hangarin pagbabago, gaya ng ipinangako, ay siyang mangyayari to sa salamatan ng tao. Wala nang hahanapin pa, muling babalik ang sigla. Sa kabila ng epidemyang namalagi, ang mahalaga makulay ang buhay na parang mga bagay. Kaya tayo na halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago.
Nagbabalik ang SMNI Senatorial Debate 2022. At sa ating pagpapatuloy, ang magtatanong naman ay ang Chairman and CEO of the Manila Times, Mr. Dante Clink-Ang II. Mr. Ang, your question please.
Thank you, Attorney Karen. If you don't mind, I'd like to hear everyone's answers before I ask a follow-up question. And here it goes. The Philippines hopes to increase the share of renewable energy to 35% of the total energy mix by 2030. By 2040, the target is to improve that to 55%. The good news is that energy production from renewables increased from 60.8 gigawatts in 2008 to 106 gigawatts in 2019. The bad news is that the share of renewables over the same period fell from 33.9% to 20.8%. As you all know, clean energy is important to sustain economic growth, climate change mitigation, and even energy security. What legislations will you propose to accelerate the development of renewables so that they meet the national targets and lessen the share of fossil fuels, particularly coal, which accounts for 54% of the country's total energy mix?
For Mr. Ang's question, first to answer is Attorney Panelo, and then we will be moving to the left.
I'll be frank with you. Hindi ko po napag-aralan yung portion, yung parte niyan. Kaya hindi ako magpapanggap na alam ko ang kasagutan. Subalit, pag-aaralan ko po yan at titingnan ko kung ano ang makakabuti sa ating bansa regarding din sa renewable energy.
Thank you, Attorney. Very honest answer. Ms. Legarda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ang. We already have the 2008 Renewable Energy Law, and we must strictly implement it. There are many provisions which are just being implemented now. And why are we lowering the energy mix of renewables when we have a law that must be implemented? Why? Because perhaps there are provisions which are not yet being fully and effectively implemented. What we must do is the oversight function of the Renewable Energy Law, as well as the Climate Change Act and the People's Survival Fund. These are laws already enacted by Congress. Happy to have principally authored these measures, and I would want the strict and effective implementation. The false dichotomy between sustainable development and natural resources, it's one or the other, hindi po totoo yan. That's why I will file the PENCAS bill, the Environment Natural Resources Accounting, so that our measurement of our GDP and our GNP is not just by the gains in terms of monetary value, but natural resources as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garda. Attorney Roque.
Ang usaping renewable po ay hindi lang usaping enerhiya. Ito po ay usaping buhay. Narating ko po yung mga iba't ibang lugar na nasalanta ng bagyong Odette at yung grabing danyos po na sinapit na ating mga kabataan ng ating mga kababayan ay dahil po sa climate change na dulot nga po ng fuel emission. So I think our shift to renewable energy is a matter of life and death. Kaya nga po kung tayo magbibigyan ng pagkakataon, una-una, ibabalik po natin ang lahat ng feed-in tariffs, yung incentives para ating mga energy producers po ay mag-resort na or magpalit, pumunta sa renewables energy. At pangalawa, isa pang naiisip ko po, i-encourage po ang mga electric cooperatives na sila na po ang mag-generate ng kanilang kuryente using renewable dahil pag ginawa mo po yan, bababa ang kuryente dahil mawawala po ang transmission charge, mawawala po yung charge kapag nasasayang po yung kuryente, mapapababa rin po ang presyo ng kuryente.
Thank you, Attorney Roque. Attorney Marcoleta.
Kailangan po ay mapalakas natin ang ating regulatory agency. The problem that I see now is that the ERC is not laying down the correct regulations in order to incentivize energies like solar, wind, and biomass. These are the things that we need to do. Also, we need to legislate certain measures in order to strengthen the powers of the DOE in order for us to influence the correct energy mix in this country, not dominated by coal, by maybe we can expand also some geothermal sources and others. This is the way this is the roadmap and this is the way to go. Unless and until we are able to put some measures to strengthen the regulatory function of the ERC, we will not be going further in this case. Thank you.
Karen, please. Follow-up question lang kay Congressman Marcoleta. Meron tayong 4 na kasamahan doon sa mababang kapulungan. I think ang tawag sa kanila ay power block. Kung ano man ang mga house bills na pinafile doon ay pinitigil ata nila. No, I remember ang NEA administrator was kicked out because of corruption.
So what is the question?
So the question is this, no? Ano kaya ang magagandang magagawin doon para makalampas naman ang legislation sa kabutihan ng renewable energy? Kasi mayroong power block eh.
Ang importante po kasi nakikita ko, hindi lamang doon sa baba, kundi sa taas din. Kaya kailangan magkaroon din po ng mga fighters doon sa taas, sa Senado, sapagkat ang marami pong measures na ginagawa namin, nahantong lamang doon sa third and final reading. Wala naman pong masyadong napupunta sa taas, kaya hindi nabibigyan ng impetus yung nagagawa sa baba. So kailangan din po natin ang champion doon sa Senado para sa ganun ay magawa natin ang measures na kinakailangan para sa kapakanan ng bansa sa usaping enerhiya.
Maraming salamat po.
We'll resume back to Mr. Ang's question. Attorney Gadon.
Okay, ang question is how will you increase the source of energy? Alam niyo yung project na in-initiate ni Bongbong Marcos doon sa Ilocos Norte, yung windmill power source. Yan ang pinakamalaking windmill energy producer in Southeast Asia. So dapat kopyahin natin yon, ipalaganap natin yon. Pangalawa, yung i-improve natin yung mga water catchment system so that we can use the turbine technology. This is a very cheap cost of source of energy, yung turbines. And we should review the tariff, feed-in tariff being granted to those solar producers, solar energy producers. So sobrang baba na binibigay sa kanilang feed-in tariff, wala nang gustong pumasok sa solar energy ng malawakan. So yun ang dapat gawin.
Attorney Olarte.
Ako po ang kasalukuyang presidente ng Clean Air Philippines Movement. Now, in order to utilize the best source of energy, kailangan po yung renewable sources. Now, hydropower po ang pinakamagandang source ng energy natin. Dito po sa Lanao del Norte, meron po tayong Maria Cristina Falls. If we can utilize the power of that Maria Cristina Falls to the maximum, no? Nanggagaling po ang water dyan sa Marawi City and papunta po dyan sa Iligan City. Maganda po if we can utilize that. Now also, aside from the hydropower sources, we can plant trees, greening of the countryside. We can plant langka, avocado, and itong kakao po. Yun ang magandang sources. It can clean the air and preserve water, which can be a good source of hydropower.
Mr. Albani.
In the name of God, the most compassionate and the most merciful. Tulad ng sinabi ko kanina, kailangan ibalik natin yung public facility sa sambayan ng Pilipino, meaning to the government. And we have to nationalize the public, especially the electric power sa bansa natin. But we should not rely on the fuel pusan, meaning we have to adapt the clean renewable energy, hydroelectric, tulad ng nuclear, solar energy, windmill, and etc. So that the consumer makaranas naman sila ng mababang bayad, because the most expensive bayad dito sa Meralco, dito lang sa Pilipinas, sa buong mundo. So maranasan nila, and then they can also, ang ating mga factory sa bansa natin, magkaroon ng magandang manufacture that they can compete in the global order.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Albani. Attorney Espiritu.
We don't have a luxury of time. We don't have the luxury of time. We have until 2030 to reduce our carbon emissions and keep our temperature below 1.5 degrees. That's what scientists say. If we do not do that, that's already irreversible. Ibig sabihin, ang human race ay in danger of the worst extreme thing is extinction. Kapag tinawag nating irreversible yan, extinction. So kapag ganito, na meron pang energy mix, hindi tayo aabot sa target na ganyan. At yung 2030 na yan, na irreversible na, ang damage sa atin, dahil nagkakaroon na tayo ng climate emergency, climate crisis, hindi tayo mabubuhay niyan. So dapat hindi energy mix. I-phase out ang mga coal-fired power plants at 100% renewable energy na dapat tayo.
Attorney Biden.
Yes, sa tingin ko, meron kasi tayong batas, renewable energy, pinoint out na po yan ni Congresswoman Laura Legarda. Kailangan po nating reviewin yan. Pero ako po, parang gusto ko rin pukunin yung mga comprehensive land use program ng iba't ibang mga LGUs para malaman ano ba talaga yung mga resources na available dito sa mga clubs na ito. At i-compare ko rin po, kukunin ko rin po yung data po sa mga DFA, sa iba't ibang DFA, para malaman po natin anong bansa ang pwede tayo makapag-tie up para ma-develop po natin yung energy. I remember, merong atang ginawang report si former Energy Secretary Jeronimo Velasco, bata pa po ako noon. Pero nung panahon po ni Presidente Marcos, meron po kinonduct silang study. I wanna get that study, find out ano ba nangyari. Kasi dati may biomass, geothermal, at ano pa. So kailangan po natin, binayaran po natin yung study na yan, di ba? So kailangan po buklatin ulit natin, basahin natin, at ang basis natin yung renewable energy.
Thank you, Attorney Bailen. Mr. Balita.
Napakayaman natin sa renewable energy, air, hydro, biogas, geothermal. Pero ang pinakamayaman tayo sa tao, we have to strengthen our educational system para mapalakas yung STEM. Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. Bakit kanyo? Isa po tayo sa pinakamababa ang budget sa Science and Technology. Sir, meron pa po tayong time, ma'am? Meron pa tayong time? Because, if we can support our scientists, our researchers, our engineers, we may be able to be more self-sufficient in developing our human resource who will really be prime movers to the development of our renewable energy. I also would like to propose for incentives for social enterprises, that will embrace green technology and clean energy use. Dahil tataas po ang demand in so doing. And we need a society through a massive campaign. And please, let's depoliticize energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Balita. And finally, Attorney Castaciones.
Alam niyo po, itong usapin tungkol sa renewable energy, meron na po tayong batas at ang kailangan po natin ay tamang implementasyon. Pero mas maganda po siguro kung amyendahan po natin ito para ma-enhance po natin yung paggamit ng renewable energy. Paano po? Sa pamamagitan po ng mga pagbibigay ng mga insentiba at saka yung mga tax cuts sa mga gustong sumabak po dito sa paggamit ng renewable energy. At siguro po, napaganda po rin sigurong ipanawagan natin sa buong mundo, sa international community, itong carbon emission. Kasi ang carbon emission ng Pilipinas, mababa lamang kumpara sa mga first world countries na kung saan ay napakalakas ng kanilang carbon emission at ipinapasa nilang obligasyon sa ating bansa. Anyway, wala naman po tayong magagawa doon kung hindi umangal at sabihin sa kanila na dapat ay obserbahan din nila ang carbon emission. Pangalawa, siguro kailangan po natin talaga na ipromote yung mga bagong teknolohiya katulad po nitong tinatawag na gamit ng electric cars. Marami po sa Pilipinas ang gumagamit po ng mga sasakyan na pinapanda ng mga petrolyo. Siguro it's high time that we should adjust and make use of it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. So, follow-up question. I think the point is that renewables have been increasing, except their share in the total energy mix is diminishing because of the faster growth of fossil fuels, particularly coal. So very few of you have actually mentioned actual legislation. I was wondering if those of you who've said that we need incentives, would you be specific in citing the laws that you would introduce that will address those incentives that you would like to see? Dr. Balita?
Yeah. 89% of our enterprises are micro-enterprises. And if they will be, I mentioned earlier about the creation of the Micro-Enterprise Commission, and that could include the incentivization of their clean energy user. And among others that we would like to incentivize is including social enterprises, which are marapat lang naman talagang bigyan sila ng incentives. And sir, I think the education that I also propose will also address that. When the EDCOM discovers the weakness of our STEM, that EDCOM will strengthen our STEM, our scientists and our engineers and the researchers.
Well, Dr. Balita, you mentioned earlier that you wanted some improvements in education.
Yes.
The PIDS last year came up with a study warning that the interest among learners in STEM, this is the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, is actually in decline.
Yes.
Fewer of them are interested in going to STEM. In fairness, the DOST mentioned that the opposite is actually true, but the DOST study will not be released until this year. So, given that you mentioned education is a solution, right? How do you address the declining interest in STEM among learners?
Actually, sir, it's not, STEM is not really the only pathway amongst the K-12 tracks.
No, for renewable energy.
For renewable energy's interest, the STEM is something we can improve through basic education. Starting from elementary, we have to retain the teachers, get them more engaged. And, believe it or not, this pandemic accelerated our embrace of the digitalization and the Industry 4.0, which I think will change the landscape of how STEM is taken by our learners, sir. I have very high hopes that the accelerated Industry 4.0 in education is going to help.
This one is for Attorney Espiritu. You said you wanted to get rid of all fossil fuel plants and go 100% renewables.
Yes.
But the problem, according to some experts, is the base load issue. How would you address the base load? Because of course, solar panels can generate without the sun, and wind farms can generate without wind. So how do you address that particular concern?
Firstly, meron namang may tamang framework ng ating batas na idalhin mismo sa household ang paglagay ng pag-operate ng mga renewable energy systems like solar. And I think kapag ginawa natin yon, dinala natin sa komunidad, and the communities operate these renewable energy systems, that will solve the problem of baseload, that will also solve the problem ng cost ng kuryente. In fact, kikita pa nga ang household dahil kapag sila ay nagpo-produce, ibebenta nila sa distribution utility para mapakinabangan ng iba.
So what laws will you introduce?
Then we should strengthen laws or even create laws that will promote renewable energy down to the community and support these communities. There was a mention about incentives. We should incentivize these communities in order to adopt renewable energy systems and do not. We no longer have to rely on billionaire power producers in the industry.
Secretary.
Yes, well, I propose po what I would refer to as a climate change mitigation act. Unang-una po, bibigyan natin ng panahon ang lahat ng coal plants na mag-convert siguro po sa LNG. Dahil ang katotohanan po, hindi po magiging sapat ang renewable para doon sa base load na sinasabi natin. Pero naniniwala po ako na LNG is the cleanest fossil fuel and we should use LNG for base load but still encourage renewable. Pangalawa po, ibabalik po talaga natin yung feed-in tariffs. Hindi po talaga magkakaroon ng incentives at solar kung hindi mababalik ang feed-in tariffs.
Deputy Speaker.
Thank you.
Ngayon po kasi na walang incentive yung ating mga...
Sorry, there are two deputy speakers. Go ahead, sir. I'll go to you afterwards.
Are you asking me, sir?
Go ahead, sir, since you started.
Okay, yung po kasing renewable energy, this is the most prohibitive source of energy. Alam naman natin yun. That is why I said, let us incentivize them by way of strengthening the regulatory function of the ERC. Sa ngayon po kasi, alam natin na mayroong cap sa kanila 100 kilowatts lamang sa mga tweed, hindi nadi-discourage sila to produce more sapagkat hindi na mabibili sa grid. Kailangan pong alisin yung cap na yon at pagkatapos para ma-incentivize sila, bigyan natin ng tax credits lahat po yung susuong dito sa renewable energy para sila ay mabigyan ng pag-asang magkaroon ng marami pang planta.
Deputy Speaker Lauren.
Thank you. The Department of Energy has recently, just last year, already put a cap on greenfield coal projects, and that's a welcome development, and we must all support that. Second, baseload can be provided by renewable energy because it is nothing new. We already have battery, not just from Elon Musk, but even in other countries, not just Tesla. In fact, but it would be self-serving because I must be transparent. My son is in renewables, so I know that there is baseload, there is battery, and we must encourage even electric cooperatives to source clean energy, renewable energy in their jurisdictions so that transmission will be less.
We're past the time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
But it's possible.
Okay, thank you. A few of you have mentioned incentivizing the development of windmills, solar, even hydro. The problem, according to some critics, is that even renewables are not entirely clean. I mean, even the construction of wind farms is not necessarily zero carbon. So they suggest instead that there should be a program to lessen consumption. Would there be any laws in your mind that would address that issue of incentivizing the reduction of consumption?
Consumption?
Yes. Because you don't want to go from one race to perdition, using fossil fuels, to another race to perdition using renewables. So some are suggesting that the better way would be to encourage people to consume less. Yes, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. May I cite the proposed legislation which my esteemed colleagues could probably support, and this is the ban on single-use plastic, because by year 2040 or 50, we will have more plastic than fish in our oceans if we continue the business as usual scenario. Second, we have a pending legislation on the circular economy so that the producers will be responsible for what they produce in terms of waste that they produce and the extended producer's responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Legarda.
I think we could explore the possibility of granting more discounts to households that use less electricity, because you're correct. For as long as consumption increases, we will run out of sources of energy. And that is partially done now by way of subsidizing the poor during the time of pandemic, no? When we actually did not charge households if their consumptions are very low.
Second, Attorney.
Yeah, probably. I think, of course, daylight saving time, we have used that before. I think we can also use it again. Secondly, daylight saving time, and then,
Attorney, you also mentioned that, there's...
work from home. Because right now we know that we can work from home. So we will be saving on transportation. We'll be saving on electricity. So I think we need to work with the civil service to find out what work that we can, encourage so that some people need not go to a faraway place to work.
Attorney, I was going to say earlier that you had suggested that we review our land use policies as well.
Yes.
I guess you were referring to solar development, but one of the criticisms of solar development is that it takes away land space from agriculture. So would you care to comment on that?
As I mentioned, the comprehensive land use program, depending on the topography of the LGU, we will know what will be the most useful energy that will be used there. For example, in a mountain, it will take some time for Napocor to build those electric poles, right? So we need solar energy for that one. So that's what I was saying. We have to review the land use of that particular area.
Final follow-up question. Secretary Roque, you brought up LNG as another source of fuel. Nuclear power is not renewable, but it's been discussed as part of the energy mix. I think the Department of Energy had also included that as a recommendation to be part of the energy mix. Would any of you care to share your position on the development of nuclear power?
Well, we should explore that, pero tutol po ako sa Bataan Nuclear Power Plant dahil ako po'y taga-Bataan at meron pong fault line sa aming probinsya at meron pong bulkan na pinatubo na malapit sa Bataan Nuclear Power Plant at yan po dahilan kung bakit sa tingin ko kung tayo mag-nuclear, huwag naman po doon sa Bataan.
Not in your backyard.
Not in our backyard.
Anybody else? Secretary?
Marami po sa ating mga karating bansa ang gumagamit po ng nuclear energy. And I think ang presyo po ng elektrisidad sa kanila ay napakababa at napakamura. Tayo po sa Pilipinas, napakataas. Pero dahil po sa takot natin tungkol po sa tinatawag na epekto ng nuclear, ay minsan ay nakakaligtaan po natin na ito ay isang makabagong teknolohiya. Siguro pwede natin ito ilagay sa mga islands na kung saan ay hindi pwedeng maapektuhan ang maraming populasyon para po magkaroon po tayo ng mas mababang presyo po ng ito yung elektrisidad.
Doctor?
I am in favor of the use of nuclear power plants as sources of renewable energy. If we use nuclear power plants safely and put them in places where they are acceptable, then there will be lower cost of fuels, and also further there will be lower quantity reducing the use of non-renewable sources of energy.
Attorney Gadon, you were going to say something?
South Korea installed the same model of our Bataan nuclear plant. Look at Korea now, South Korea. They sell cars, heavy equipments, cell phones, appliances, and they have invaded the whole, the global market. And that's why they are very successful. Now, kung ibabawal natin yung Bataan nuclear plant, dapat buhayin uli yan. And not only that, yung solar energy kasi, nung panahon ni Noynoy Aquino,
Attorney Gadon, time's up.
Mr. Spiritu.
Yes, I don't agree that nuclear energy should be classified as renewable energy.
It's not.
Yes. Tandaan natin na kaya tayo mag-a-adapt ng renewable energy dahil sa ating climate crisis, climate emergency. Hindi naman siguro kaiba sa atin ang mga nangyari sa Chernobyl na nakapagsira ng ating environment, nakapagsira ng ating climate. Kaya hindi ako papayag dyan sa nuclear energy niya.
So you're advocating solar development, but the share of solar power in the energy mix, according to the National Renewable Energy Program, is a mere 1.2% as of 2019.
Yes, that's why our solution would be to bring solar energy down to the household. Meron tayong batas na nag-aalaw per household mangungutang ka sa Pag-ibig para maglagay ka ng solar panel sa iyong bahay. And in fact, we have zero metering, right? So that the household, kapag nag-produce siya ng energy more sa kinukonsume niya, pwede niyang ibenta sa Meralco at kikita pa siya. Therefore, palaganapin natin yan. Para masolve natin ang problema ng energy mix, yung share ng solar sa ating energy mix. Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, meron akong follow-up kay Atty. Spiritu.
Okay.
Pinag-usapan kasi yung mix kanina eh. No? Yung original question ni Blink was on the mix that should be offered by the DU to the consumers.
Yes.
Okay? But would you consider having 2 DUs or more in a particular franchise area competing with each other? Whether they are ECs or PDUs?
What I'm talking about is you will actually be independent already of the transmission system. In fact, you could contribute if you put solar panels down to the household level and empower communities in order to provide for their own energy needs. Yan ay magiging autonomous na sila, na nagpo-produce na kanilang enerhiya. In fact, makakapag-contribute pa sila sa national grid. Doon sa mga hindi nila nauubos.
So sinasabi niyo yung consumers can produce their own power?
Yes.
Parang yun ata yung Solar ng Bayan franchise.
Yes.
Ni Senadora Ligarda.
In fact, our office, the Bukluran ng Manggagawang Pilipino office, has installed solar panels sa aming office. And we will go for zero metering. And later on, we could even contribute to the national grid.
Before Attorney Suplico's follow-up question, Attorney Gadon and Attorney Marcoleta raised their hands. Attorney Gadon?
Yun kasing solar energy, maganda sana yan eh. Pero kagaya nga na sinabi mo, Mr. Dantiang, na 1% na lang ang share ng solar energy.
And the efficiency is about 10%.
Yes. You know why? Because the service contracts were awarded to companies that do not have capacity to put up. Binigay kasi dun sa mga malakas lang eh. And then they were not able to produce the projects, no? At siyempre nagkaroon din ng period ng
Thank you,
implementation.
Attorney Gadon. Sorry, the time's very limited. Attorney Marcoleta.
Yun po kasing solar on household level is easier said than done. Sapagkat ito po ay napakataas ang presyo kapag ka ikaw ay gumawa niyan. Ang importante i-consider po natin seriously yung ating nuclear plant sapagkat napakamura po talaga ng kuryente makukuha natin dito. Iwasan natin maging emotional at political sa issue nito sapagkat kailangan natin talaga ang isang mabuting source ng energy para sa ganon ay abot kaya po lahat ng mamamayan ang elektrisidad na may dudulot natin sa kanila.
Thank you.
And what interpolation?
We have candidates raising their hand. Mr. Balita and Attorney Bailan.
Yeah, na-mention ko po kanina yung mga enterprises that could be incentivized for using renewable energy. Huwag po natin kalimutan ang government offices ay isang napakalaking consumer ng energy. If you can start with them and invest in them, then probably we can set the example. by doing that. And also, I think this has to be a whole of society approach, and this is where education will come in very handy. Thank you.
Attorney Bailan.
I was in college when the Bataan nuclear power plant was a hot topic and it was mothballed. But when I worked in DBM and I had access to more information, I learned that the government spent billions to acquire this kind of energy. And when the fault line was discovered, I think then President Marcos added another 1 billion to make it more secure because it is cheaper. So I think it's about time that we tap the PNRI, Nuclear Research Institute, to give us expert opinion on this one.
Thank you, Attorney Bailan. And finally, we have Attorney Castersones raising his hand.
Yes, I would just like to respond and probably to support the position taken by Attorney Bailan when it comes to the National Land Use Act, because, you know, we have a lot of good ideas when it comes to a renewable source of energy, but the departments of our government are not in line with these so-called projects and programs. Like, for example, the program of Senator Legarda for solar energy, it took years before it was approved because the different departments and agencies do not really cooperate with the so-called system that would have to really support this renewable energy.
Thank you, Attorney Castersones. Professor Carlos?
Yes, not to rain on the parade of everybody with, all our heroic measures to migrate to renewable energy. Also, with all due respect to Clink here. The empirical evidence tells us that on the ground, 67% of energy use is still fossil fuel. And therefore, in the foreseeable future, it will be like that. So, just to think about it, it's not a question. But now that Dr. Balita has raised the issue of government being one of the biggest consumers of energy, if you become senator, are you going to continue the building of that ugly building at where is that, BGC, with no windows? Isn't that a huge energy consumer? That ugly big building which looks like an egg, which will be your future home?
The Senate. The Senate.
The Senate building, di ba? I think it's cost a lot of zeros.
That's why I think government should really give us the best example of what we're talking. It's not about imposing it on us or on the private sector, but I think the government should really take the lead. And that's why even my answer to the Senate job description is related to it. Let's walk our talk and let's start with government. And that will have a sizable value to what we're talking about. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but maybe Senator Legarda can answer that if the building of that ugly building can still be aborted or what? The boat has sailed.
Professor Clarita Carlos, I must say that I was in the Senate when that was discussed, and there was a presentation of several architectural firms. I'm not privy to that. I was not in the committee that selected it. It has already been funded for 1 or 2 years. I'm not certain if the funding of the construction of the building is still ongoing, so we leave it at that.
Which means it cannot be aborted.
It would be a white elephant because it's been funded for 1 or 2 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Yun po ang pagkakaalam ko dahil wala na po ako sa Senado ng 3 taon.
Yeah. Can you all please do something about that ugly building without windows?
Ma'am, we will, but we need your help to get there first.
You have to get there first.
Ma'am.
Okay. Final comment from Attorney Alorte.
Well, if the building really is one that is disadvantageous to the to the public and to the government, we must do something. We should abort it. I will propose the abortion stoppage of this building, which you said is not good for us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That was a very interesting question by Mr. Dante Ang that really spun off to so many different questions. And now we'll hear from our final member of the panel, SMNI News anchor, Dr. Eleanor Cardona. Dr. Cardona, your question, please.
Thank you, Karen. and maraming salamat din sa lahat po ng mga senator representatives sa gabing ito. Good evening once again to everybody. And we have heard the meeting of minds of all that are here. And narinig po rin po ang lahat po ng inyong mga magiging panukalang batas sakaling po magkakaroon po kayo ng chance sa Senado. At ang tatanong ko lang po, but first I would just like to quote from Frederick Douglass, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." And so we have built vivid infrastructure projects, but I think it's about time also to look at building our future generation, and that's our children. And so my question is on the Juvenile Justice Welfare Act. This question is regarding the children in conflict with the law. How will you address the problem of children, even younger than 9 years old, being used as scapegoats in the commission of grave or serious crimes, considering that we are signatory to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child?
For Dr. Cardona's question, the first candidate to answer is our female Deputy Speaker, Miss Legarda.
Thank you. Nakakasakit po ng puso na isipin na ito isang realidad. Ang DSWD, ako po'y naniniwala, ay kailangan bigyan ng programa at pondong suporta para sa rehabilitasyon at guidance sa mga magulang, mga maralitang pamilya at mga pamilyang maaring hindi maralita pero ang mga bata ang siyang nagiging biktima. I recall when I was in the Senate on my last year, we funded certain centers in different parts of the country to address the juvenile justice problem. I am not certain whether the DSWD had proceeded with such infrastructure projects to house the children who were orphaned and had the operational expense for the programs that they had thought of them. Ito po'y isang malapit na issue sa puso ko at gusto ko pong bigyan ng pansin pagbalik po sa Senado, God willing.
Thank you, Ms. Legarda. Attorney Roque.
Tutol na tutol po ako sa panukalang ibaba ang age of criminal responsibility. Naniniwala po ako na dapat panindigan natin ang obligasyon natin sa yung karapatan ng mga kabataan. Hindi po dapat ibaba sa 9 ang age of criminal responsibility. Naniniwala po ako na ang utak ng bata is still in the process of development until they hit at least the age of 15. And until that time, we should exert all efforts to reform and to show the right path to all children. Kakamatay lang po ng aking matandang dalagang tiya na nag-alaga sa amin, and she was really a pioneer in advocating for the rights of children in conflict with the law. Yung separate detention center po, siya ang nag-push niyan, and I think that should be implemented on a nationwide basis. At pangalawa po, kinakailangan talaga na maging proactive po ang ating DSWD in the rehabilitation. I am also part of an NGO, Onesimo, that seeks to rehabilitate young people. It can be done po. Walang bata na pinanganak na masama ang budi.
Thank you. Attorney Marcoleta.
Kailangan po ay magsimula ang bata, ang kanyang values ay sa pamilya. Kailangan po nating suportahan ng legislation kung paano mapapalakas ang pamilya para ang kanyang moral values ay maging karapat-dapat sa lipunan. Kailangan din tumulong ng ibang institutions like the church and the schools. Ito po ay napakalaking responsibilidad sapagkat bago pa po makagawa ng criminal offense ng isang bata, mapigilan na natin yun. At ang pinakamabuting paraan ay yung masuheto natin sila, mabigyan ng magandang pag-uugali ng halimbawa para sa ganun ay hindi sila makapunta sa kondisyon na nakagagawa ng kamalian na pagsisihisihan sa habang buhay. Kaya nga po napaka-importante ng legislation. As a matter of fact, the family is one of those state's policies enshrined in our Constitution, and therefore we should support this by way of legislation. The institutions must help the family resolve this problem of juvenile delinquency.
Thank you. Attorney Gadon.
I'd like to ask this question first for the Deputy Speaker. May plano po ba kayong gumawa ng batas na papanagutin na po ba ang mga magulang itong mga bata na naging offenders po?
To a certain extent, yes ma'am, because kailangan po talagang gwardiyahan ng ating mga magulang ang mga bata. Marami po kasi ako nakikita mga instances na kung saan ang mga bata ay napapariwara dahil na rin sa kakulangan ng guidance ng mga magulang. Sa ganitong mga sitwasyon, kailangan po magkaroon ng pananagutan ng isang magulang para makita niya na importante ang mga anak sapagkat sila ang ating puhunan sa kinabukasan. Kailangan po nila itong panindigan sapagkat sila nauunang may responsibilidad para sa kanilang mga anak.
Attorney Gadon?
Tama naman na responsibilidad ng mga magulang ang pagbigay ng values sa mga bata. Pero ganun din ang Catholic Church. Marami sa mga pare na sa halip na magturo ng leksyon sa mga bata ay ang inaatupag nila ay yung mga anti-Marcos, anti-martial law at mga communism ang kanila tinuturo. So dapat suwituhin din itong Catholic Church. Wala na kayong ginawa kundi manira kay Marcos, kay Bongbong, kung ano-ano mga kalukuhan, mga martial law kayo, pari kayo. Dapat ang ituro nyo yung kagandahang asal, hindi yung pabumulitika.
Attorney Olarte.
A child below 18 and above 15 should be presumed to be a child with a mind that belongs to the minority age, the minority group. So if this is the case, they should not they should be given more rights by the law. Now, the blame should be rather be given to the parents who just abandon their children, neglect their children, begging on the streets, and child abuse. I think the parents should be held responsible.
Mr. Albani.
Sa ngalan ng Diyos na sa imawain matulungin po pagmahal. Ang juvenile problem natin dito, nakikita ko po, hindi po problema ng magulang lamang. Ang problema ito po, kailangan i-handle din ng government. Hindi kasalanan ng mga bata na sila ay mahirap, hindi kasalanan ng pamilya na sila ay naghihirap. So the government, we have to do something and make a very good program paano maiangat ang kanilang kinabukasan. Bakit nagawa ng ibang bansa? Ang programa ng ibang bansa from whom to whom. Bakit hindi magawa ng bansang Pilipinas that we are the richest country in the whole world? So dito, kailangan po alamin natin ang problema, hindi lang problema ng mga bata. Kailangan magsimula ang pag-aaral dito sa kanilang bahay, which is the core values, papunta sa paaralan, at bigyan natin ng magandang pondo ang lahat ng mga teacher dito sa Pilipinas. Kung kailangan, dublihin natin, alang-alang sa bayan na ito.
Thank you. Attorney Espiritu.
I agree na hindi dapat binababaan ang age of criminal responsibility. I disagree na dapat parusahan ang mga magulang. Tandaan natin ang krimen dito sa baba ng ating lipunan sa mga mahirap ay dahil sa social problems na create ng ating lipunan. And I also agree na dapat bigyan natin ng tamang value sa mga kabataan. Dapat tinuturo sa school na masama ang extrajudicial killing, masama ang red tagging, masama si Marcos, marami siyang human rights violation.
I disagree.
Nung panahon...
Okay. Attorney Gadon, you have time for...
It's still my time.
Nagkabumbahan na.
It's still my time.
We'll go back to Attorney Espiritu first to finish his 20 seconds.
It's still my time. Don't
Attorney Larry Gadon!
20 seconds left.
Dapat tinuturuan natin ang kabataan na respetuhin ang buhay, ang human rights, respetuhin ang buhay ng lahat at hindi dapat pumapatay ang ating mga gobyerno. At hindi nagnanakaw ang ating gobyerno. Diyan tayo magkakaroon ng mga mabuti.
Attorney Larry Gadon lang ang malakas!
Attorney Gadon, you have 45 minutes for interpellation.
Yes, Attorney
Gadon, you may now interpellate interpolate with Attorney Espiritu. 45 seconds.
Yeah, palagi nilang pinopoint out niya, palagi nilang sinasabi yung human rights violations ni Marcos. Unang-una, sino ba ang nagpapatay dun sa mga NPA na gustong sumurrender? Di ba si Joma?
Yun!
Bakit ninyo sila si Marcos?
Attorney Espiritu, you have 30 seconds
Sino
for
ba
your
bumomba
rebuttal.
sa Plaza Miranda?
Yes.
Ha? Sila Joma.
Okay. I'll go by the
Bakit nyo isisisi kay Marcos?
Yun!
We should not use this forum for a propaganda against the Marcoses.
Yes!
It was damning.
Yes. Attorney Gadon, your 45 seconds is over. We have 30 seconds for Attorney Espiritu's rebuttal.
Binuksan mo ang usapan, wag mo akong pagbawalan. I go by the record, Amnesty International, 3,257 ang pinatay nung panahon ni Marcos. 35,000 ang mga it's my time, wag kang bastos. It's my time. 35,000. 35,000 ang tinorture. 70,000 ang kinulong. It's a matter of record.
Thank you. 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Noong nagkaroon ng kaso sa Hawaii, yung 10,000 human rights victims, nung ini-implement nila dito, nag-file sila ng petition sa RTC, wala silang naipresentang ebidensya. Pagdating sa Court of Appeals, wala rin. So asan yung sinasabi nila yung human rights violations na yan?
Lakas ni Gadon!
We have...
Dismissed yung kaso!
Dismissed!
Attorney Roque, 45 seconds.
Kung ano man ang nangyari sa nakaraan, inisa-isa ko po ang records. Wala pong kaso for human rights violation sa Amerika si Ferdinand Marcos.
Gatong!
Inisa-isa ko rin po ang mga kaso na decided po ng ating Philippine Supreme Court. Totoo po, co-administrators of Ferdinand Bobong Marcos, wala pong kaso na siya mismo nagnakaw.
Attorney Espiritu has 30 seconds for a rebuttal, and we have a question again from Dr.
Thank you.
So with all
You have the time. You have the opportunity, Attorney Espiritu, for a 30-second.
my microphone is being silenced all the time when I do my rebuttal. Can I be able to continue without my microphone being turned off?
Yes, Attorney Espiritu.
Okay, with all due respect to Attorney Harry Roque, I know your history. You were anti-Marcos before. You were for human rights before. Your life, you spent your life against the Marcoses, you work for human rights, and now that you were given a Senate spot under the party of Bongbong Marcos, now you cry hallelujah and praise Marcos.
Okay. Thank you, Attorney Espiritu. Since you alluded to Attorney Roque, we will give him 30 seconds for a rebuttal. And just for the information of our candidates, your microphones will be silenced when others still have time. So that's something that they do to give others opportunity to speak. So Attorney Roque, since you have been alluded to, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
There was nothing respectful with what you said against me. Ang katotohanan po ang pinag-uusapan, hindi po ang patay na Marcos, ang pinag-uusapan ang buhay na Marcos. Sa akin po, anagutin ang mga nagkasala, pero yung mga hindi po gumawa ng kahit anong kasalanan, wag po natin idamay sa sisi. Yun lang po.
Okay. Now, we have...
Pengen ng beer.
Sorry, I'm being spoken to by the floor director, so I'm getting confused. But let's go back to the question that was raised by Dr. Cardona, and now she's raising her hands for, I guess, a follow-up question.
Yes, it takes a topic on the children, and then this is what happens. That's why we really have a big problem on this law. Nagiging juvenile na po tayo. Ang tanong ko po kasi meron talaga tayong problema sa ating mga kabataan. And it's facing us every day. Kaya po dito sa forum na ito, or sa debate po na ito, sana mabigyan po natin ng panukalang batas, polisiya, upang matulungan din yung mga kabataan na as young as 9 years old ay nagiging kriminal na. And who is to blame? Kayo naman po yung tumatakbong gagawa ng mga panukalang batas na dapat sundin ng ating mga mamamayan. I'm sorry to lecture this, but this is just how it is.
Champagne na lang.
Yun kasi po yung tanong. Kasi yung mga
Champagne,
criminal
champagne.
ngayon, yung mga bata, 9 years old, drugs, rape, murder. Kaya nga, ano ba talaga ang edad? Yun ang tanong. Kasi nga may law tayo, yung Juvenile Justice Welfare Act. I hope, kung hindi pa naman kayo familiar, alam natin na yung 15 years old to 18, meron siyang diversion. But 15 years old, below, wala po siyang pananagutan. 9 years old, magdadala na po ng birth certificate. Magnanakaw, pero magdadala ng birth certificate at hindi siya makukulong. Dahil nga sa batas na ito. Kaya nga itong tinatanong ko, panahon na ba pang baguhin natin itong panukalang batas na ito? Kaya nga, kasi ito, 9 to 8, ginagamit na po sila ng mga sindikato para magnakaw at para gumawa ng krimen. Kaya napakaseryoso po ng problema ng ating bansa. Dahil dito sa ating mga kabataan, ito na po. Sige. Ito pa isa, how will you ensure that the government will properly implement this one? RA 9344, which provides for the rehabilitation and reintegration of the child offender. So how will ensure that the government, ito po yung dapat nating bigyan pansin.
We'll go back because we were originally the first question of Dr. Cardona. We'll have to go to Attorney Bailen for that question. And I suppose Attorney Dr. Cardona, do you want the follow-up question to be addressed as well? Because
yes, but I would like to listen to
Attorney Bailen first.
Thank you.
First question first.
They say it takes the community to raise a child. And for us in the Philippines, I think we need to strengthen the family by strengthening the barangay. The barangay will be the forefront talaga in addressing this one. Because in the barangay, as shown in the pandemic, it really stepped up. So in the barangay, we can talk there, you know, the church workers are also there, the social workers are also there. So I think we need to find out how to establish foster families also. Because sometimes some families, probably because of the problems caused by the lockdown, affected probably, you know, their mental, there's a breakdown. So I think stronger families can become the family that can adopt temporarily these children, and of course the state should provide the resources, and so that love will continue to prevail because love covers a multitude of sin.
Thank you, Attorney Bailen. Dr. Balita.
Yeah, ang ginagawa ng matanda sa mata ng bata ay nagiging tama. What have we done to help the poor? What examples are we showing the children? And what have we done to develop the countryside?
Pag nagsasalita, lutang.
You know, criminality is social dynamics, and we just cannot blame the children for it. Ang sa akin man, let's strengthen the family. I would like to commend those who mentioned it already. Let's help the educational system so that somehow the educational system can address it. Let's make the school more attractive to children so that the teachers can perform their role. But the teachers have become somehow not given the premium. We have not given the teacher the regard so that we can attract really the best and the brightest all the time. Kasi maski sweldo man nila hindi comparable with the other profession. It takes a village to raise a child, and I don't want to blame the children for having done these crimes because they are just used. And let's get the adults, penalized for it. Thank you.
Attorney Castriciones.
Alam niyo po, ang pagpapababa ng criminal liability sa mas mababang edad ay hindi po tama yon. Sapagkat wala pa pong age of discernment ang bata, lalo na pag siya ay may edad na 9 na taon. Ang kailangan po natin dito ay kailangan po natin pagtibayin ang pagbibigay ng mga values and virtues sa ating pong mga kabataan. Iyan po ay hindi po gampanan lamang ng isang pamilya. Of course, the family, first and foremost, has the so-called responsibility of educating the children. But this has to be a joint effort amongst, of course, the church, the education sector, our government, private institutions. A case in point, katulad po ng mga OFWs natin, nakikita niyo po, this is a deeply rooted problem eh. Yun po mga OFWs natin, pupunta po sila sa ibang bansa, they will have to leave their families, and who would take care of their children? Di po ba? Nakakaawa po, kaya po siya napapariwara. So kailangan po natin ungkatin, balikasin ang ating pong mga batas at ating pong mga programa kung gusto natin magkaroon magkakaroon tayo ng mga batang matatalino at disiplinado.
Thank you. And finally, Attorney Panela.
Alam po ninyo, hindi po solusyong permanente ang pagbabago ng batas. Tingnan po natin ang ugat kung bakit nagkakaroon ng juvenile delinquents. Ito ay resulta ng kawalan ng pag-aaral. Ito ay resulta ng kahirapan. Ang mga bata na nag-aaral, magaganda lahat ang itinuturo sa atin. Subalit paglabas nila, iba ang nakikita nila. Nakikita nila ang kasamaan, nakikita nila ang pagnanakaw, nakikita nila mga opisyalis ng bayan nagnanakaw, nakikita nila nag-aaway. Kahit sa isang forum na ganito ay hindi natin maibigay ang ating respeto sa isa't isa. Kailangan pong magkaroon tayo ng internal na pagbabago sa ating mga sarili upang mabuo ang isang lipunan kung saan ang mga batang ito sa kanilang paglaki ay makikita nila ang kabutihan na iyon ay natural lamang sa loob ng mga batang ito. Kaya kinakailangan po, unang-una, edukasyon. Ang mga mahihirap, pag-aralin natin. At pagkatapos, palakasin po natin ang pagmamahal sa bawat isa.
Attorney Panelo. And that ends our round number 1. Thank you to all our candidates for answering all the questions from our panelists. Magbabalik po ang SMNI Senatorial Debate 2022.
Lakas! Grabe oh. Oh, ang lakas doon. Oh, sapol na sapol sila. Kalma! Kalma! Kalma lang, walang magagalit. Ang pangis niya, Tortilari ka doon. Sinopla niya kagad, no? Diyos ko. Sinopla kagad niya, Tortilari, eh. Nakatigim, eh. Sinopla kagad niya, Tortilari. Kinantok ako, meron nagising ako nagising. Ayan, ako. Grabe. Grabe, sinopla ka agad ni Tortilari ka dun. Nakatingin si Spirito dun eh. Pero si Harry Roque biglang pumalo eh. Pagpalo ni Harry Roque, medyo nagugulat pa yun eh. Ang tinutukoy ni Spirito dun eh si FEM, hindi si Bongbong na buhay ha. Galing. Pero I like that, gusto ko yung upakan nila kanina. Wrong move si Spirito, sayang. Sumigaw ako. In the last minute, lumitaw yung kulay. In the last minute, lumitaw yung kulay ng lintig eh. Ano ba naman yun? Hindi ko rin nakalain yun. Lumiglain ako sa kanya. Hindi ko rin nakalain yun ha. Yan ang maganda, pumalo si Roque. Pumuntos nga siya. Hinanap ko ng Senado, walang kaso si Bongbong Marcos. Oh. Ang galing kanina, kala ko habing galing Napapano ako Biglang lumitaw yung kulay, laging anti-Marcos. Akala ko kanina pa naman, okay na. Galing, sabi ko. Napakagaling mo magsalita nito. Nakikinig lang ako dito. Ay ko, ang galing mo magsalita nito. Bigla mamaya, nagsisisigaw. Biglang nagsisisigaw ng kung ano-ano, lintik. Nawalan tuloy siya ng tropa pips. Yun masakit doon. Anti-Marcos ang lintik. Natulala lahat eh. Kiss siya kayo. Ay nako, naglalabasan na lahat ng anti-Marcos. Ay abangan ninyo. Yan, sasabihin ko sa inyo huwag kayong boboto ng anti-Marcos huwag kayong boboto ng anti-Marcos. Matik yan, hindi matutupad yung mga pangarap natin sa buhay. Huwag kayong boboto ng anti-Marcos. Matig yan. Walang mangyayari sa bansa natin. Ha? Naintindihan niyo ako, mga katanso? Ngayon pa lang, alam niyo na kung sino yung boboto ninyo. Directly nagsasabi na ako. Pinatay ko sa Facebook kasi baka demonetize tayo doon. Delikado. Si Carbalita, hawak ni Isko Moreno. Isa rin yun, lutang. Mamaya na ang laban. Ayan ako. Yan ba yung gusto nyo yung boto tayo? Lutang. Isa naman, anti-Marcos. No votes. Ano sa inyo? Ay, maraming salamat nga pala kay Ate Tina. Nagpakulay si Ate Tina to. Grabe, salamat po. May nagpakulay sa akin kanina. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat. Ito, pasasalamatan ko lang. Ay, Tina tuloy. Kay Ate Maybel Bilina, maraming salamat. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ate Maybel Bilina. Grabe, ha. Ngayon ko lang nakita. Maraming salamat. Thank you, shoutout kay Ate Maybel Bilina. Yan, bibira manood sa atin yan, pero gulat ako biglang nagpahuli. Salamat po. Thank you very much. Straight Uniteam tayo. Walang lalayo. Straight Uniteam tayo. Yan, ha. Walang lalayo sa atin, straight Uniteam lang. Member ng Akbayan. Nagulat din ako eh. Salamat Ate Maybel Bilina. Thank you po. Thank you. Naantok na ako kanina eh. Bigla ako nabuhayan. Binanatan ni Atty. Larry gano'n eh. Nagigil si Atty. Yan ay upo senador ko. May palaban. Palaban yung senador. Yun ang pinakamalampit. Paano mababashi ka matano? Biglang lumabas yung ugali. Totoo! Okay pa yung Muslim eh. Medyo nagugusto ako pa sumagot eh. Pero nagulat ako kay Espiritu. Sayang siya. Sayang for me. Tanga siya. Sinira niya pangalan. Kaya nga sinira ka eh. Yun nga problema, sinira niya. Ayan, di kailangan ng kape para magising. Gadon at Roque lang ang kailangan, Marcoleta. Yan, totoo yan. O, ngayon kayo humusga kung sino senador niya. Kayo humusga kung sino senador ang kailangan ninyo. Kampo ng hell. Sabi niya Ate Maybel Bilina. Si Bongbong Marcos pa inatake niya. Yan lang yung biggest mistake niya. Pag pinatulan mo yan, sinabihan mo na ganun, papalagang ka ni Atty. Larry Gadon. Shoutout kay Atty. Larry Gadon, galing. Nakatikim ngayon si espiritu ng totoong espiritu ng mga Marcos. Upaan ka talaga ni Atty. Larry Gadon kagad doon. Walang sabi-sabi. Ito, laking big break kay si Atty. Larry Gadon yan. Kampo ng kadilim si Espiritu. Ayan na magiging pag-uusapan doon, ha? Ayan, yung Sheila Macheda. Ayan, nice ate Sheila Macheda dito rin. Ayan, shout out kay Sheila Macheda. BNK, thank you for using live streaming palagi na nakakagaan ng loob. Maraming salamat po. Hey, regards dito sa ibang tropa sa kabilang sa ibang channel. Balita ko, okay na daw eh. Wala nang Marites. Ayan na naman. Ayan na.
Nagbabalik ang SMNI Senatorial Defense 2022. And now we're on round 2. For this round, we have questions from different sectors of the country and from SMNI news anchors from different parts of the world. And I was told during the commercial break that there are instances where candidates will have their microphones muted. And that's when they go beyond their time, if it's not their turn yet. Or if you also speak with a personal attack that goes beyond the issues that were asked by the panelists. So we just want to remind all the candidates, let's have this as a debate based on issues, and let's avoid personal attacks on each other. Thank you. And for this second round, each candidate has 1 minute to answer each question. And you'll have 45 seconds for interpolation and 30 seconds for rebuttal. Ang ating unang tanong ay mula kay Sas Rogando Sasot, SMNI anchor based in the Netherlands.
The current mutual defense treaty between the United States and the Philippines contains no provision on automaticity. This means that neither the United States nor the Philippines is obliged to defend each other automatically if an armed attack occurs in their territories and in the Pacific area. This lack of automaticity is a double-edged sword. While it doesn't provide automatic security guarantees, it gives each party some sort of protection from being dragged immediately to the conflict of each other. If during your term as senator, the Mutual Defense Treaty gets renegotiated and therefore needs to be ratified by the Senate, how will you assess whether an automaticity provision would be in the national interests of the Philippines?
Based on how we ended in the last round 1, this question will be answered first by Attorney Roque.
Rebus sic stantibus. A fundamental change in circumstances is a ground upon which we can terminate a treaty. Ang aking pananaw po, lipas na po itong Mutual Defense Treaty. Ipinasok po natin ito na ang daigdig ay tinatawag na bipolar, dalawang labanang mga bansa na naglalaban. Hindi na po ganyan ang sitwasyon sa mundo ngayon. Pero ang tanong po, yung lack of automaticity. Yan nga po naging problema sa pagpapatupad ng ating Mutual Defense Treaty. 2 beses na wala tayo ng isla, malinaw na dapat sumaklolo ang Estados Unidos sa atin, hindi po nila ginawa. Kaya nga pong sinasabi ko, kinapanahon na po na pag-aralan muli ang MDT at tignan kung ito talaga ay sang-ayon sa ating pangnasyonal na interest dahil ang paningin ko po, nung hindi sila nagbigay ng saklolo, nang nawala ang dalawang isas natin, nawala na po ng saysay ang Mutual Defense Treaty. Iba na po ang panahon ngayon, nung panahon na ipinasok natin yan. Ibang-iba na po ang prioridad, prosperity na po ngayon, hindi na po labanan.
Thank you, Attorney Roque. Attorney Marcoleta.
Kailangan po reviewin na natin ang Mutual Defense Treaty sapagkat ito ay matandang batas na po. Tama po yung rebus sic stantibus sapagkat sangayon po sa kanyang Article 2, sinasabi roon na kinakailangan ng dalawang bansa ay magtulungan upang magkaroon tayo ng capacity bawat isa to resist armed attack in the Pacific. Unang-una, hindi naman kailangan magkaroon ng armed attack. Yung threat lamang po ay importante na na kailangan magtulungan. Pero 70 years ago, nakaraan na po yan. Pero hanggang ngayon, hindi pa natin nararating yung capacity to resist armed attack sapagkat wala namang ganung pagtulong ang ginawa ng Estados Unidos para sa atin. Bagamat ito ay obligasyon niya sapagkat sinasabi, pwede tayong magtulungan jointly Pagkatapos ay sinasabi nga na kailangan palaging nag-uusap yung dalawa para sa ganun, kung ang bawat isa ay malaman niya na ang kanyang international integrity o national interest ay napapariwara na kailangan magtulungan. Hindi po nakikita natin ngayon ang kondisyon na yan.
Thank you, Attorney Marcoleta. Attorney Gadon.
70 years ago pa yung 1952 Mutual Defense Treaty na yan. Marami nang nagbago. In fact, sa kapasidad lang ng pagtulong sa atin ng Estados Unidos ay nabawasan na rin dahil wala na yung kanilang mga military bases dito. So kung ang inaasahan natin ay pagtanggol tayo ng US, hindi mangyayari yan. Yung leksyon na lang sa Ukraine, puro forma, puro satsat lang ang sinasabi ng US doon. Pero nung nag-atake ng Russia, hindi rin naman sila tumulong. So kung nagawa nating alisin yung mga military bases dito ng US, alisin na rin natin yung Mutual Defense Treaty sapagkat hindi na applicable yun. I believe International Law Professor Harry Roque and Deputy Speaker Dante Marcoleta on those issues.
Thank you. Attorney Marcoleta. Attorney Olarte.
Okay. I believe that the Mutual Defense Treaty should now be abolished, and we should think of other agreements that would benefit our country. Now, the question is, how will you assess if an automaticity is needed? A treaty should be studied well to assess whether an attack on the Philippines would be also considered as an attack on the other country, because if an attack on the Philippines would cause a lot of damage and death to our country, I believe automaticity should apply. So this Mutual Defense Treaty does not provide clearly this automaticity.
Thank you, Attorney Olarte. Mr. Albani.
In the name of God, the most compassionate and the most merciful, sabi ng mga matatalinong abogado, ang Mutual Defense Treaty, obsolete na yan. But we must liquidate arbitrary ruling as well as the treaty in agreement with the other nation. As long as na hindi coincide dito sa what they call that, the national security, because now we are facing problem in our region. Pangalawa, nakikita natin dito, we have to modernize also all armed forces of the Philippines. We have to urge funding sa mga sandatahan lakas natin tulad ng police, military, army, para magkaroon tayo ng tinatawag na safety net of our community in the younger future generation to come. Because otherwise, we have to do a win-win solution for the highest interest of our country, hindi sa interest ng mga ibang bansa. Maraming salamat.
Thank you. Attorney Espiritu.
I agree. Yung alliance natin sa our partnership natin with the United States has resulted in historical injustices committed upon the Filipino people, especially nung nandito pa yung US bases. And I agree na kailangan na nating umalis doon sa unequal relationship na yan, even yung pag-alis sa Mutual Defense Treaty, sa BFA, sa EDCA. But I don't agree with the pivot to China. I believe that we must develop or pursue our own independent foreign policy in cooperation with our neighbors and in the pursuit of peace. Hindi yung you side with one party and then you escalate conflict with the other party and nadadala tayo sa kanilang mga interest at sa kanilang mga conflict when in fact pwede namang hindi tayo madala doon. And magkaroon tayo ng non-aligned arrangement dito sa Southeast Asia.
Thank you. Attorney Bailan.
I think there's a need to review the Mutual Defense Treaty because it was signed several decades ago and there are new developments happening. And with all due respect, I think we also need to take into consideration the findings of the Department of Foreign Affairs because they are the agency in charge of developing our independent foreign policy. But I learned that that this treaty is supposed to help both countries, right? But it seems like when we're trying to procure ammunitions, helicopters or some stuff, because I also became a chair of the Bids and Awards committee in our agency for a certain period of time. I learned that maraming mga conditions. Hindi katulad when you buy, I think in Russia, you can buy 16 helicopters yata, pero sa US, kailangan pa approval ng Senate.
Thank you, Attorney Bailan. Dr. Balita.
Yeah, we cannot find security from the insecurity of another. And I want to go back to the independent foreign policy with the Filipino in mind. Let's recognize that what happened was where interest of cooperating agency alliance, that's where we were. I would not go for the defense treaty, mutual defense treaty, but rather would like to see it from a multilateral perspective among community of nations and the democracies of the world that I was talking about earlier. And treaties should be looked into what's in it for us, not only on the defense side, but on the other side, so like economic, cultural, educational, and of course, that's in the pursuit of peace and prosperity. And along that line is also the strengthening of our own defense so that we can develop our own security from within. Thank you very much.
Attorney Casticiones.
You know, it's very ideal to say that we just junk the Mutual Defense Treaty, but it cannot be done. We will be creating a void if we will immediately and outrightly junk the Mutual Defense Treaty. We have to put into our minds the fact that we belong to an international community of nations. And of course, sometimes if there are some ambitions by our neighboring country in order to become great, they normally invade other countries as well. For example, the non-aggression pact between Germany and Russia, it was signed between them. But look at what Germany did. It attacked Russia and thereafter it attacked other countries as well. And definitely that can also happen, more especially now that there is a struggle for supremacy when it comes to first world power, and that's the reason why I think we should probably we can amend, we can renegotiate in order to strengthen the support that must be extended to the Philippines, but not to totally jump, because by doing so it's a really a big gamble that we will be entering to if that happens.
Thank you. Attorney Panelo.
Alam po ninyo, kailangan susukatin natin ang anumang tratado na pinapasok natin sa ibang bansa sa pagpapatupad ng mga provision nito. Kung yung provision ay hindi tinutupad, ibig sabihin, yan ay walang saysay. At kailangan na nating i-review, i-evaluate, at hanapin natin ang mga provisiones na magbibigay ng proteksyon sa ating bansa. Territorial integrity, sovereignty, yan po ang palagi nating titingnan. Nakita natin ang Mutual Defense Treaty ay mukhang nagkulang sapagkat marami na ang mga halimbawa na kung kailangan tayong bigyan ng tulong ng Estados Unidos ay hindi naman isinagawa ito. Mukhang sila lamang ang nakikinabang. Kaya siguro kailangan i-repaso natin. Pag yan ay dumating sa panahon na aprobahan o hindi, pag-aralan po natin at hanapin natin ang tama mga provisiones upang mabigay ng proteksyon ang interes ng ating bansa.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Legarda.
At the time that the Mutual Defense Treaty was entered into, 1951, there was a Cold War. The situation has changed. Our enemy is not each other, but poverty, environmental and ecological security, and we must assess all the aspects of national security. Second, the Senate is not the treaty-making body. As we know, the Senate concurs in the ratification of treaties. In the end, it is only the chief executive or the president who can leave a treaty, rescind a treaty, and this would have to be, of course, concurred in later on by the Philippine Senate. So it is worth looking into the Mutual Defense Treaty, which has been there for many decades, and see how it applies to us now. But in the end, what lies most important is our national interest and our sovereignty as a nation.
Thank you to all our candidates. Ang susunod na tanong ay mula sa isang IT youth leader, Rureli Bayao, who's a member of the Ata Manobo tribe.
Ako po si Rorilyn Bayao mula sa Talaingod, Davao del Norte, isang kabataan na mula sa pamayanang Katutubo, at gusto ko pong itanong ang tungkol sa aming kalagayan. Hindi po ba dapat alam ninyo ang aming kinakaharap na mga suliranin? Matagal na po ang pamayanang Katutubo na binubuo ng iba't ibang organisasyon na naging biktima sa programa ng CPP-NDF. At ito rin po ay naging dahilan upang dumanas po kami ng talamak na paglabag sa aming mga karapatan na ginagarantiya ng ating Constitution at batas na IPRA or Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997. Dapat po na tumulong kayo sa pagbigay ng kalutasan sa mga suliraning aming kinakaharap sa ngayon ay nabigyang kalutasan ng mga programa ng INTF-ELCAP. Kung kaya, karapat-dapat lang na ito ay ipagpatuloy at palakasin. Ano po ang posisyon ninyo sa isyong ito?
Thank you. For Rureli's question, first to answer is Attorney Marcoleta.
Alam po ninyo, nakasulat sa ating saligang batas na kailangan pong proteksyonan at ibigay ang kaukulang kagalingan sa ating mga indigenous people. So katungkulan po ng Estado na yan ay mapanatili. Kailangan lamang po ay palakasin natin ang ahensya na may kinalaman po sa inyong proteksyon at sa pagtatanggol ng inyong karapatan. Lalong-lalo na po ang inyong pinagkukunan ng kabuhayan at pati po yung inyong participation sa ating lipunan. Kailangan marinig po ang inyong boses, kaya lahat po ng ito, lahat ng inyong karapatan ay kailangan nating mapagtibay, mapangalagaan, at ito'y magagawa lamang sa magitan ng mga kaukulang batas nating isusulong upang mapalakas ang isa ng gobyerno. Siya naman ang tututok sa inyo para mapangalagaan ang inyong kaugalian, ang inyong kultura, at ang inyong way of life, sapagkat kayo po ay parte ng ating lipunan at ng ating sambahayan.
Thank you. Attorney Gadon.
Ako ay naniniwala na dapat ay palakasin pa ang programa ng NTF-ELCAP. Ito naman ay basically hindi about anti-terrorism, kundi yung pagtulong sa mga komunidad na magkaroon ng hanap buhay, magkaroon ng magandang ekonomiya ang kanilang mga komunidad. At maganda rin na imbitahin natin ang ibang mga negosyante o ibang mga namumuhunan na bigyan ng hanap buhay din ang mga nasa indigenous people. In fact, meron akong isang meron akong alam na foundation na nirerentahan ng kanilang mga lupain at sila ay ini-empleyo, sinisweldohan, at yung kanilang mga inaani ay binibili rin ng itong kumpanya na to. Kaya yung mga ganun sigurong programa ay palawakin upang matulungan natin ang ating mga indigenous people.
Attorney Olarte.
Ako po ay isang abogado ng indigenous peoples ng Mindanao and Visayas. Ang problema po, malaking problema ng indigenous people ang edukasyon. Marami po sa kanila ay hindi po nakapag-aral ng kolehiyo, nakapagtapos ng kurso. And marami pong mga bata doon na hindi po nadadala sa eskwelahan dahil sa kahirapan. At gutom po itong mga batang ito, hindi makapag-concentrate sa school. So ang aking panukalang batas is to make elementary education for these children attractive in these places of the indigenous people. Bigyan po natin sila ng libreng almusal o pananghalian para sila po ay mattracted in going to school at makapag-concentrate po sila sa pag-aaral dahil mayroon pong laman ng kanilang tiyan.
Thank you. Mr. Albani.
In the name of God, the most compassionate and the most merciful. Karapatan po ng mga indigenous people because they are the hub origin of this country. Pero po, nakalimutan natin sila. And we have already, meron na tayong batas under the Republic Act 8371, the right of the indigenous people. And it was also sanctioned by the United Nations na karapatan nila ito. Pero napabayaan ng gobyerno. At lalong-lalo na mga oligarch, makikita natin sa Mindanao ngayon, ang mga lupain ng mga indigenous people hanggang ngayon, oligarch na nakikinabang ang mga dayuhan tulad ng mga mining. Hindi natin napapabigyan. So dito, kung mamarapatin natin, sana pagbigyan natin ito ng pansin, hindi lang siya magiging department ng indigenous people sa kasalukuyan. Itaas po natin ang antas nila. Without indigenous people, there is no Republic of the Philippines. So makikita natin dito, nandito si Albany, isang katuwang ninyo sa Senado sa darating na araw.
Attorney Espiritu.
Kailangan proteksyonan at respetuhin ang ating mga IPs. Kailangan proteksyonan at respetuhin ang kanilang ancestral lands. Dapat hindi sila pinapasok ng mga mining companies. Dapat sila ang nagkokontrol ng kanilang mga resources sa loob. Dapat hindi pumapasok ang mga security forces ng Estado para harasin sila. Dapat hindi ginagawang anti-insurgency framework ang pag-a-assiste sa kanila. Kung gusto natin silang asistihan, huwag natin silang i-draw sa anti-insurgency framework na dapat sila ay merong peace and quiet sa kanilang komunidad at hindi sila nadodraw sa conflict ng gobyerno at ng insurgency. Hindi ko maintindihan kung paano nakakatulong ang NTF-ELCAC sa IP at hindi ko naintindihan kung ito'y nakakatulong ba sa ating lipunan na siyang ang NTF-ELCAC ang nagbungsod ng mga red tagging at patayan dahil merong pagkatapos ng red tagging, terrorist tagging. Dapat nang buwagin yan.
Thank you, Attorney. Attorney Bailan.
Bilang isang anak na isang anthropologist po, napaka-importante po talaga na bigyan talaga natin ng importansya ang ating mga indigenous people. Ang nangyari po kasi mukhang nakalimutan natin sila, nakalimutan natin ang kanilang history, kasi ang history po natin hindi mabubuo kung hindi po natin alam ang story nila. Karamihan po ng story nila ay oral history, kaya kailangan po ang NCCA, ang National Historical Commission at ang DepEd ay tumulong po siguro sa pag-i-implement siguro itong, kasi may budget na po itong NTF-ELCAC na to, di ba? Tutulong sa community. At ako po, nung naging DBM Undersecretary po ako, nung pumunta po ako sa United Nations, meron po akong draft na ni-require po bawat ahensya ng gobyerno na bumili ng produkto po mula po sa mga indigenous women. So lahat po ng agency i-require yun. Si Cabsef Evasco po, binigay po niya yung tulong dito pero hindi po masyado siya na-promote po.
Thank you, Attorney Biden. Dr. Balita.
Ako po ay maharap sa inyo na proud sapagkat sa aking pong munting negosyo sa Review Center, lahat po ng tribal indigenous people ay naging scholar ko. At yan po ang ipinagmamalaki ko. At ang aking bilin kapag sila ay pumasa sa mga board exams na kinuha nila, bumalik ka sa iyong tribo at tulungan mo sila. Kailangan po ibigay natin ang kanilang minimum basic needs ayon sa kanilang pangangailangan, tutugon sa kanilang kakaibang pangangailangan. We have to respect their self-determination for their development. Huwag po natin gamitin ang ating sariling pamantayan sa pag-unlad, sa ating sariling pananaw, sa ating mundo, sapagkat iba ang kanilang interes. The cultural preservation, the environmental and ancestral issues of their land. At ang mahalaga po, dapat magkaroon sila ng representation sa pamahalaan. Di po ba dapat sila ang may party list, hindi yung mga mayayamang pamilya na nagtatayo ng party list? At ang tutugon po dyan ay walang iba kung hindi ang edukasyon. Ang literacy at ang entrepreneurial education ay sigurado makakatulong sa kanila.
Thank you, Dr. Balita. Attorney Castraciones.
Bilang kalihim po ng Department of Agrarian Reform, ako po ay naging saksi sa mga problema po ng ating mga indigenous people, lalong-lalo po sa usapin ng ancestral lands. Meron po tayong mga batas pero kung minsan ay hindi po ito nagkakatugma. Nagkakaroon po ng mga overlapping claims sa tinatawag po natin na usapin sa mga lupa. Siguro dapat magpasa tayo ng isang batas that will clearly define the metes and bounds of the so-called claims that would be intended for our IPs and also for our ordinary farmers or the so-called people who would like to have a property of their own that is actually vested by law. At ang kailangan po natin dito ay bigyan sila ng tamang edukasyon, papaunlarin po ang kanilang kultura. At syempre tulungan po sila para po mabigyan po ng mga tamang tulong na galing po sa mga iba't ibang ahensya po ng ating pamahalaan. Alam po natin na ang kahirapan ang number one recruiter po ng tinatawag na insurgency. Kaya kung ito po ay hindi natin matutugunan, sigurado magkakaroon po ng problema ang ating bansa. Kailangan po natin kapayapaan.
Thank you. Attorney Panelo.
Yung tanong po kanina ay kung ano ang magiging posisyon ng isang senador tungkol sa NTF-LCAC. Ako po ay pabor dyan sapagkat sa pag-iikot ko po, sinabi ng mga bayan na nabigyan ng NTF-LCAC ay natalo nila ang rebellion sapagkat pag ikaw may pondo doon sa mga lugar na binibigyan, nagkakaroon ka ng mga farm-to-market roads, kakaroon ka ng mga espilangan, nagkakaroon ka ng mga bagay-bagay na kailangan ng taong naroroon na nahihikayat sumama sa rebellion. Ito pong mga indigenous people, hindi po ba napapabalita na marami sa kanila ang nahihikayat sumama sa rebellion. Subalit nung dumating ang NTF-LCAC, nagbago po at sila yung sumasama na. Pero kaugnay po dyan, ang problema pa nila ay kailangan yung mga batas na talagang pabor sa kanila ay dapat ipatupad na hindi napapatupad. Yan po ang dapat na gawin natin.
Thank you. Ms. Legarda.
The Philippines is a culturally diverse nation of more than 110 ethno-linguistic groups that comprise 17 million of the Philippine population, 61% of whom are the Lumads of Mindanao. Minarapat ko pong i-document ang kanilang tangible at intangible heritage through the NCCA, a government program, sa isang programang dayaw. Napakayaman po ng kanilang kultura na dapat paigtingin po natin at protektahan. Ang mga programa po ng gobyerno para bigyan po sila ng socio-economic services gaya po ng LCAP. Ang mga barangay po ng Antique, dahil meron po kaming Iraynon, Bukidnon at mga ati ay nakinabang rin po doon. Ano man ang pangalan po ng programa ng gobyerno ay dapat po up to the last mile, so to speak, ang mga serbisyo at huwag natin kakaligtaan ang malaking porsyento ng ating populasyon ng ating mga katutubo. Dapat po natin bigyan ang socio-economic services, paigtingin ng edukasyon, kaya may mga pending bills po tayo para po sa traditional property rights.
Thank you, Ms. Legarda.
Salamat.
Attorney Roque.
Isang bagay po na nagbibigay dangal sa Pilipinas ay tayo po ang kauna-unahang bansa sa buong daigdig na kumilala po sa karapatan ng mga katutubo sa lupa nilang sinilangan. Ito po ang kaso ng Carino versus Insular Government. Matapos po naging decision to ng US Supreme Court, ang buong daigdig kinilala na po ng ancient title ng mga IPs ay as legal as a Torrens title system. Ang problema po, yung kaso ng Carino hanggang ngayon po wala ni isang pasto na naibigay sa pamilyang Carino at ito po ang problema ng IP. Nandyan po ang mga batas, kulang po ang implementasyon, ang solusyon po sa marginalization ng ating mga IPs, ibigay ang kanilang karapatan sa lupang sinilangan. Matapos po ang Carino, nagkaroon po ang desisyon ng Inter-American Court on Human Rights at ang sabi nga ng Korte, walang pagkakaiba ang karapatan ng IP sa lupa sa karapatan ng buhay. Dahil sa ating mga katutubo, ang lupa ay buhay. Ganyan po ang problema ng ating mga katutubo. Pag hindi binigay ang lupang sinilangan, wala rin po silang karapatang mabuhay.
Thank you, Attorney Roque. At dyan po nagtatapos ang round 2 ng ating debate kung saan sinagot ng ating mga candidates ang mga tanong mula sa iba't ibang sektor. Sa ating round 3, babalik po ulit tayo sa mga questions ng ating panelists. So, huwag po kayo aalis at magbabalik ang SMNI Senatorial Debate 2022.
Para sa isang tingin dumating na kailangan nyo palatandaan na nga ito na magbubuklod ang mga tao para sa mayroong pagbabago. Lahat ay handa na sumama, malakas sa sipata para kay Bongbong at Sara. Sigawan na di humuhuba para sa dalawang tao na may dalang sa ganitira. Ikaw ay aming iniimbita, halika na tayo magkaisa. Gusto mo rin bang sa isang mithiin. BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara, BBM Sara. Halina't magkaisa para sa isang mithiin. Halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago. Ang sandata sa ating hirap, pagkat parating na ang pag-asa nating mga Pilipino. Kayo walang bibitaw, ilang araw na lang ang liwanag ililitaw. Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, magandang bukas ay tanaw. Kapayapaan at malasakit ang solusyon sa pinagdaraanan natin. Hiratiwalag kasabay ng panalangin, handang itama ang mali na karaan. Asahang may paraan dahil ang kahalagahan ng buhay ay pagmamahalan. Ang bawat isa ay di namin nangamba sa ating bansa, dahil ang pinakahihintay natin lahat ay malapit na. Wala nang hahanapin pa, muling babalik ang sigla. Sa kabila ng epidemyang namalagi, ang mahalaga mapuli ang buhay na parang mga bagay. Kaya tayo na halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago. Ang sandata sa ating hirap, pagkakarating na ang pag-asa nating mga Pilipino. Halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago. Ang sandata sa ating hirap, pagkakarating na ang pag-asa nating mga Pilipino. Ang sarap gumising nang wala nang pangangamba, tayo ay magiging sama kasi sasaya. Sabay-sabay kaharapin ang alis ang balakid, tayo ay palalayain. Malanghap ang sariwang hangin, hangarin pagbabago. Gaya ng ipinangako ay siyang mangyayari to sa salamatan ng tao. Wala nang hahanapin pa, muling babalik ang sigla. Sa kabila ng epidemyang namalagi, ang mahalaga makulay ang buhay na parang mga bagay. Kaya tayo na halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago. Ang sandata sa ating hirap, pagkakarating na ang pag-asa nating mga Pilipino. Halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago. Ang sandata sa ating hirap, pagkakarating na ang pag-asa nating mga Pilipino. Halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago. Ang sandata sa ating hirap, pagkakarating na ang pag-asa nating mga Pilipino. Halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago. Ang sandata sa ating hirap, pagkakarating na ang pag-asa nating mga Pilipino. Halina't isigaw mo, ito na ang simula ng pagbabago. Ang sandata sa ating hirap, pagkat parating na ang pag-asa nating mga Pilipino. Kaya walang bibitaw, ilang araw na lang ang liwanag ililitaw. Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, magandang bukas ay tanaw.
Of Senator Chahani, and Senator Chahani gave that to me as my assignment. What is your position in regard to this? To drop or to pursue?
For this question, Attorney Gadon will answer first.
I think we should pursue the claim on Sabah because historically it belongs to us. The Malaysian government and a gas company that occupies Sabah continues to pay rent on the Kirams, the Kiram family. So therefore, it belongs to the Philippines, and we should pursue our claim.
Thank you.
Attorney Olarte.
Well, we should pursue our claim to Sabah. It belongs to the territory of the Philippines. It is our duty to preserve our territorial integrity. The fact that the Malaysian government still pays rent to to the sultans of Sulu is proof that we are the lessor and they are the lessee. And we have the authority, the power to terminate the lease agreement if there is failure of the lessee to comply with terms and conditions of the contract. In this case, it appears that the rent is insufficient and there are several violations of the terms of the contract between the Sultan and that of the Malaysian government. So therefore, we should terminate the contract, pursue the Sabah claims legally in the International Court of Justice, probably.
Thank you. Mr. Albani.
Salamat. In the name of God, the most compassionate and the most merciful. Alam niyo po, we have to pursue the claim of Sabah sapagkat ang kasaysayan ng kahapon ay nagsasalita. The origin of the government came from Sulu under the so-called Eastern King Dynasty, which is the Maharlikan. Makikita natin, it was headed by Saripul Hasim. In Mindanao, Sultan Kudarat, in Mactan, Lapu-Lapu, in Luzon is divided into three form of government. Prinsip Dua of Pangasinan, Sultan Lakandula, and Sultan Sulaiman. Ang batas natin ay batas ng Diyos. That is the root cause. Makikita natin na hindi natin na-recognize, nagkaroon ng putukan, awayan. Nagtataka ako dito, gusto na doon i-pursue yung claim ng Sabah. In fact, ang gusto niya, nakita ko sa video na patayin niya lahat ng mga Muslim, pati daga, pupulbusin niya ang lahat ng mga kapatid natin Muslim. So ako pa nagtataka, sana mapaliwanag ng mahal natin kapatid. Salamat tayo sa mga Muslim, hindi siya pinatulan sapagkat hindi mangbang sa kasaysayan ng kahapon.
Thank you, Mr. Albani. Do you want to have a rebuttal, Attorney Gadon?
Yes, I clarified in that TV interview by, I forgot the host. I clarified that I was referring to the terrorists, not on all the Muslims. And in fact, the Muslims became my friends. In fact, the president of the Imam Council of the Philippines is already my kumpare. Inaanak ko yung anak niya sa kasal. Marami akong imbitasyon sa mga Muslim events. Oh.
Mr. Albani.
Gusto ko lang i-ano kay kapatid na doon kasi nilahat niya ang kapatid na natin Muslim. Kasama kami doon, mga bata at saka matanda. At sa nasaluduhan ko mga kapatid natin Muslim, 17 million population, hindi siya pinatulan. At lalong-lalo pasalamatan ko mga kapatid natin Christian kasi hindi din siya pinatulan. Sa nangangahulugan ng mga Muslim at saka Christian na hindi bobo sa lipunan.
Thank you, Mr. Albani. Now we'll stick with the issues. We'll go back to our question on our claim to Sabah. Attorney Espiritu.
Well, I go for the right to self-determination of the Sulu and the Sabanese peoples. We could, everything starts on the ground. We cannot create something that is not there. If there is a struggle for the Sulu and Sabanese people in order to integrate their territory, I think that should be left to them to determine. There's a problem with the framework of the nation state being overlaid into this issue because it will always be limited. For example, if we pursue that claim based on simple property relations, that's the problem because the nation state has a different dynamics altogether. So it should really start on the ground, the right to self-determination. That's what I support.
Thank you, Attorney Espiritu. Attorney Bailan.
Yes, I think we need to recognize that Sabah belongs to the territory of the Philippines. However, there are some policies that were made before that undermined or emasculated some of these rights. To the extent that the Kiram family even went to, they tried to go to Sabah to assert their claim. Unfortunately, many of them and their relatives died. But of course, we want to pursue peace. And I hope that ASEAN will provide the means so that the Malay race that we want to engage again, because we're Philippines, the Malaysians are the Malaysians, but at the end we're all Malays. In fact, Rizal, our national hero, is considered to be he ranks high among the Malaysians. So I feel that we need to pursue peace to be able to assert our claim there.
Dr. Balita.
Yeah, ang atin ay atin. Ipaglalaban natin ito. Actually, dapat maging inspirasyon natin yung tagumpay ni David sa kay Goliath dun sa ating Hague ruling. At maging inspirasyon yan to pursue this legally, diplomatically, historically, and of course, peacefully. Pero I agree na isang malaking factor na dapat natin consider dito is ano ba yung gustong mangyari ng mga tinatawag nating Pilipino na nandun sa lugar na yon. I think we have to address that first dahil baka in the end, ipinaglalaban natin na angkinin natin ang lugar. Subalit ang mga taong nandun ay magsasabing hindi sila at this point in time, I don't have empirical data as to their self-determination issues. But to me, it's also important to consult them before we proceed to the next level. Thank you very much.
Attorney Castrosones.
We cannot drop our claim with regards to Sabah because by historic right and legal title, that is ours. It is embedded and enshrined in our constitution under the definition of our national territories. But anyway, the problem is we cannot implement or enforce it. Why? Because we cannot subject ourselves to a litigation before the ICJ or the International Court of Justice. Why? Pag hindi po isinumite ng Malaysia ang kanilang sarili sa jurisdiction nitong korteng ito, ay siguradong hindi po natin mapag-uusapan kung sino po ang may rightful claim dito po sa teritoryong ito. Pero atin po yan kaya dapat angkinin po natin. And only recently, meron pong desisyon ang Arbitration Committee doon po sa Paris na nag-award po sila ng $12 billion sa mga heirs ng Sultan of Sulu. Kaya ang ibig sabihin ay kinikilala po nila ang karapatan ng ating pong mga kapwa Pilipino tungkol po doon sa lupay na yan. Atin yan, kunin natin yan, bawiin po natin yan.
Attorney Panelo.
Klarong-klaro naman po na ang Sabah ay teritoryo ng Pilipinas. Ang kasaysayan ay nagpapatunay dyan. Sa punto legal, atin pa rin po yan. Ang nagiging problema lang ay hindi consistent ang ating pag-pursue sa Sabah claim. Kaya nagkakaroon ng problema. And at the same time, yung pong mga naroon sa Sabah, iba rin ang kanilang mga layunin at damdamin. Kaya sa akin pong pananaw, ang ating pamahalaan ay dapat ituloy ang kanyang claim sa Sabah sa pamamagitan ng diplomasya. At baka sakaling pumayag din ang Malaysia na baguhin ang kontrata nila sapagat insufisyente ang renta, kailangan dagdagan upang maging legal at maging makatarungan ang ating claim sa Sabah at pati na ang pamilya na umaangkin ng kanila.
Thank you. Ms. Legarda.
We must pursue the Sabah claim for historical and cultural reasons while taking into consideration the security of the Filipinos in southern Philippines and in Sabah itself.
Thank you. Attorney Roque.
Katotohanan, ibinigay po ang Sabah sa Sultanate of Sulu ng Sultanate of Brunei dahil tinulungan po ng mga taga-Sulu ang Sultanate of Brunei noong nagkaroon ng pag-aaklas dyan sa Brunei. Katotohanan, pumasok po tayo ang kasunduan ang gobyerno ng Malaysia doon po sa Sultanate ng Sulu na magbabayad sila ng pajak. Ang pajak po, ang sabi ng mga Malaysians ay pagbili. Ang sinasabi natin ng pajak ay renta. Pero ang katunayan po, hindi po natigil ang pagbayad ng pajak at wala naman pong bili na forever or in perpetuity ang pagbabayad. So naniniwala po ako, yan lang po ay renta. Malinaw po na ang Sabah ay kabahagi ng Pilipinas dahil ito po ay propiedad ng Sultanate of Cebu na inassign nila sa Republika ng Pilipinas. Gayunpaman, may mga realidad. Ultimately, yung mga nandun po sa Saba magdidesisyon kung kanino sila gusto maging kabahagi. Ang importante, yung claims ng Sultanate of Sulu ay
Thank
mabayaran
you,
po.
Attorney Roque. Attorney Castraciones is raising his hand for a comment.
Attorney Roque, gusto ko lang pong malaman kung tama po yung sinabi nyo na ang padyak ang ibig sabihin para sa mga Malaysians ay binili. Sapagkat ang sinasabi po ng padyak ay perpetual lease. Yan po ang sinasabi nila. At kaya nga po sila nagbabayad ng renta sa atin dahil lease nga po ito, hindi po bili. Kaya po siguro you have to clarify that.
No, yun po aking sinasabi nga po. Ang sinasabi ng Malaysia daw yan, bili. Pero kahit saan kayo pumunta sa parte ng planetang ito, wala pong bilihan na perpetual ang bayad. Renta po yan, malinaw. Kaya nga po yan ay rinirentahan nila dun sa Sultanate of Sulu. Hindi po tayo nagkakaiba ng pananaw dyan.
Attorney Castraciones is raising his hand for a rebuttal. You have 30 seconds, sir.
Kasi kaya nga po sinasabi natin dahil nga po sila po ay nagbabayad. Katulad po dito sa nangyari ngayon dito sa Arbitration Committee sa Paris na kung saan sila po ay nagbayad ng $12 billion dito sa heirs ng Sultan of Sulu. Na ibig sabihin, kinikilala po nila ang karapatan natin dyan. So kaya dapat siguro sabihin natin na ang perpetual lease na yan ay hindi ownership. Pag sinabing lease, ibig sabihin ay inuupahan mo lamang. Kaya siguro dapat ipagpatuloy natin ang ating pananaw na yan ay atin at teritoryo po natin yan.
Thank you. And Attorney Roque is raising his hand for a rebuttal.
Paglilinaw lang po, hindi tayo nagkakaiba ng posisyon dyan. Tama po, nabasa ko rin sa balita na nagkaroon po ng arbitral decision at kung minsan po ako'y kinonsulta, hindi lang po ng Sultanate of Sulu, kundi ng Sultanate of Brunei. Ang aking pinropose nga po ay arbitration dahil may arbitral clause doon sa contract of Padjak. I-verify ko lang po kung ano talaga itong decision nito dahil kinakailangan po magkaroon din ng biyaya yung Sultanate of Sulu doon sa arbitral decision na yan.
Mr. Albani raises hand for an interpellation. You have 45 seconds.
This is not an interpellation but nagpapasalamat ako bilang isang Muslim coming from Sulu, ang ating mga kapatid na applicant na naniniwala the historical facts of yesterday na kailangan maibalik ang Sabah dito sa Pilipinas at saka sa tagmayari. Papasalamat ako sa kanila. Sana continue yung decision natin that we have to fight. Makikita natin out of 100% income of Malaysia, 60% came from Sabah because of the oil exploration. So makikita natin ito makakaragdag sa ekonomiya ng bansa natin. Kung tulong-tulong ang gobyerno, tutulungan ang mga Sultanate of Sulu in North Borneo. Maraming salamat.
Dr. Balita.
I would like to expound on what I said earlier about the people in Sabah. I think our strongest link to the victory of our claim are the people there. And I think the government, the Philippine government, will have to make them feel our presence and our relevance to their lives right now because they are our strongest link. But definitely, we have to claim it, as I said. Ang atin ay atin, ang ipaglalaban natin. Thank you.
Attorney Olarte is raising his hand. Attorney Olarte.
Yes, ma'am, I would just like to ask our friend here, Senator, to be in my left side, whether or not the people of Sulu or the Kiram family receive the amount of 12 billion from Paris.
Ang pagkakaalam ko po, ang pagkakaalam ko po, si Princess Jason Kiram, isa kong one of my best friends, kung naka-receive po siya ng 12 billion, wala na po akong problema pagpondo sa aking eleksyon. Wala pa po sila nakukuha.
Mr. Albani.
Alam niyo po, sa katotohanan, itong mga claim na ito nagagamit lang. Akala nila nakatanggap ang mga kapatiran natin, Muslim, lalong-lalo na di claimant. Even Singerson po, hindi sila nakatanggap kung makikita natin dito. Pangalawa, itong tinatawag na Padjak lease, nakikita natin na sa Malaysia, nakatanggap sila noon. Pero magkano lang, I think around 300,000 pesos kung hindi ako nagkakamali. So dito po, nararapat natin i-claim ang Sabah.
Thank you, Mr. Albani. And finally, Attorney Castraciones.
Bilang pong paglilinaw, hindi pa po na-award, hindi pa po na-implement yung decision po ng Arbitration Committee, kaya wala pa pong natatanggap. Pero definitely, meron na po tayong leverage dyan para makatanggap dahil pag ito po ay desisyon ng isang Arbitration Committee, definitely we will have the right to demand for it and we can take measures on how to implement the same. At kaya po, yan po ay isang unang victory na masasabi po natin para sa ating claim, para sa Sabah po.
Attorney Gadon.
Gusto ko sana itanong kay Secretary Jan Castriciones kung yung arbitration decision na yun ay nag-participate ang Malaysia or kung Sabah lang or Philippines lang.
Well, yan po ang kanilang depensa na sinasabi nila na they have not been properly represented. But since it is an arbitration committee, and definitely as mentioned by by Attorney Roque, that there is a clause there wherein it can be submitted to arbitration clause, then definitely that would govern. And of course, hindi ito similar doon sa issue ng International Court of Justice na kapag ikaw ay hindi nagpakita doon, ay hindi pwedeng magkaroon ng jurisdiction ang korte. Pero ito ay arbitration clause ito. At ngayon, sigurado kapag sila ay nabigyan ng tinatawag na notice, and definitely they must have to comply. Otherwise,
Thank you, Attorney Castriciones.
salamat po.
So we will go back to the question, and the final answer will come from Attorney Marcoleta.
There is indeed an abundance of evidence to support the contention that we should pursue our claim to Sabah. The only problem, Madam, is I think if the constitution in operation is still the 1935 constitution, that would be possible. The only problem is noong tayo po'y magkaroon ng bagong saligang batas, yung 1987 Constitution, ay dito nasara na po yung pagkakataon na i-pursue yung claim na yun sapagkat kung titingnan po natin within the meaning of the territorial provision of the 1987 Constitution, nawala na po yung historic rights eh. Sa makatwid, sa 1935 Constitution, panahon po ng, o 1973 Constitution, maging sa 1935 Constitution, nandun pa po yung historic rights. Pero ngayon, dahil meron ng constitutional impediment, maaaring mahirapan po tayo kung paano natin gagawin, considering that there is now a limitation.
Thank you, Attorney Marcoleta. Interpellation from Attorney Olarte.
Yes, Madam. Despite the fact that our friend here, senatorial candidate Marcoleta, claims that nawala na po yung historical right na nasa 1935 Constitution, itong ating 1987 Constitution still retains the legal right. So sa akin po, yung legal right is a matter that we can use to pursue our claim for Sabah.
Thank you. Attorney Castriciones and then Attorney Marcoleta.
Of course, pag sinabi mong historic right, hindi mo na pwedeng burahin ang history. It will always be there because it's a part of our history. And no matter what law you would pass, you will never be able to erase history. Part yan ng ating bansa, part yan ng ating mga batas, kaya dapat yan ay dapat ipatupad. Kaya yan po ang dapat natin makita.
Attorney Marcoleta.
Ang sinasabi po natin, Madam, nung tanggalin po yung historic rights sa ating territorial provision sa 1987 Constitution, ay nasara na po yung ating pag-asa na ipursu yung katwiran na kailangan ma-reclaim natin ang Sabah. Sapagkat malilimita po tayo sa sinasad ng ating saligang batas. We cannot legislate beyond the provisions of our own constitution. Atin ay atin, okay lamang po. Ngunit dahil nga sa bagong constitution na yan, parang ipinamigay na natin yung atin.
Attorney Castriciones.
You know, legislation.
Yes.
You know, you cannot set aside historic right. Beyond legislation, historic right will prevail because history will always be history. And we should fight for it because that is actually our own. And we will not be able to set it aside because it's our history. Kaya po yan ang magiging basihan po natin. Hindi po pwedeng dahil wala po sa konstitusyon natin, ay hindi po natin pwede na natin ipasantabi itong ating karapatan na angkinin ang lupang yan.
Secretary, how will we do it? I think the issue is not that we have a right to claim it, but if you ask the Sabahans themselves, they will identify more with Malaysia than with the Philippines. And then secondly, there are undocumented Filipinos in Sabah, mostly Tausuks, who are themselves denied basic social services and are in effect stateless and prone to recruitment by religious fundamentalists. So how do you do it without antagonizing a strategic partner in Malaysia and respecting the rights or the wishes of the Sabahans themselves?
Actually, there was already a time when a survey was conducted in order to seek the opinion of the people who have been staying there in the place. But the thing is, who conducted the survey? It was the Malaysian government, and definitely it would be their possession to protect their territorial integrity. I think it would be much better if there would be a neutral body that would have to conduct the so-called survey to know what is the real situation and what would be the position of the people there in Sabah, so that we will be able to come up with an answer that would definitely address the concern of the people in that place.
Okay.
Karen, please.
Okay, I just have to remind everyone that we have a hard stop at 11 because some of our candidates have an early morning tomorrow. Secretary Sal Panelo has been raising his hand, so I'll let him speak, and then
Please. Let me just say that the legal right arises from the historic right. Kasi ang history nga ay nilis ng Malaysia. Doon papasok yung legal right. Kaya hindi po pwedeng paghiwalayin yung dalawang yan. Hila mo po.
Thank you. So, I'm still seeing people raise their hands, but I know that we have candidates that have to really go home. They have an early morning tomorrow. I wish we could have more time, but that concludes our third and final round of the SMNI Senatorial Debate 2022. And I'd like to thank all our candidates for enduring 4 hours of questions. I know that's really long, but you really gave us insights as to your stand on certain issues and your platforms for government. So thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists, and thank you to everyone who watched us today. It is my pleasure to host and moderate tonight's debate. Thank you, and this is Attorney Karen Meno signing off.
Ayan, shoutout nga pala kay Joshua. Nagsasalita ngayon si Joshua SMNI. Hey, what's up, Josh? Anyway, guys, no, ayan, napakinggan nyo yung mga senatorial candidates natin. Ngayon dito sa SMNI senatorial debate, mga katanso. Ayan, napakinggan nyo sila together with the... sabi nyo na. Pinakabongga si Attorney Larry Gadon, pero the best ang Uniteam doon. Anyway guys, Uniteam lang tayo, Uniteam lang, nagawa naman ng Uniteam natin na ipagtanggol ang ating nais, pero good job. Nice and good job. Thank you. Shoutout kay Josh, nagsasalita si Joshua. Mensahe. So, huwag nyo kakalimutan na mag-like mga katanso, presidential debate. Ganda ng tugtog do, habang ganyan. BBM Sara. Galing ba? Alright. Kita nyo sila, di ba? Kita nyo na po yung Uniteam. Uniteam nga, kunyari. Okay, maraming salamat po SMNI. Live sila sa SMNI at salamat sa pagpapagamit ng video nila. Thank you very much sa inyo SMNI. And thank you very much sa Attorney Larry Gadon, from spokesperson Harry Roque, Marguleta, mga pambato natin doon, talaga nakipagdikdigan talaga sila. Anyway guys, thank you very much. Ingat po kayo palagi. Magpapaalam si Biyahe ni Koy, mga katanso. mas maganda mainig dito sa Uniteam. Yeah, Uniteam tayo. Walang iwanan, Uniteam. Uniteam lang tayo. Alright. Thank you very much for watching. Sinamahan niyo ako dito. Yan, may topic sana ako kaso di na natuloy yung topic ko dahil biglang pumulusok natin. Wala naman manonood sa atin pag may topic pa tayo. Alright mga katansog, papaalam na po si Biyahe ni Koy. Maraming salamat po sa inyo. Thank you very much. Ingat po kayo palagi. Ingat mga katansog. Huwag niyo kalimutan mag-like.